All right. Welcome everybody to Adam Casts on Saturdays. This is my favorite day actually because I get to have guests, I get to do some deep dives, and I've got a special guest today. I'm really excited to talk to him. This is Corey DeAngelis. How's it going, Corey?
Going really well. This is my favorite day too because it's the day that I'm here. So thank you so much for inviting me today.
Seriously, it's my pleasure. I love talking about education. I think it is super important. I mean, all humans need to learn from somewhere, right? We have to have a base, and if the base is crumbling, then society crumbles. And look at the world that we're living right now. So you can education is huge. We have to, and I know I don't want to get ahead of myself because I know you're basically a pro at this. So I'm really excited. So welcome everybody. I really appreciate you coming. You can follow Corey DeAngelis on Twitter. We'll get into that. You can follow me, but subscribe, like. Actually, that reminds me.
Oh.
So I created tradition here on Adamcast, and excuse me, Salty. This is Salty the Bear. I don't know if you knew this here is Salty. I'm gonna have to borrow these. Excuse me. Here, why don't you take?
Oh
that?
yes.
Take that. Here, I'm gonna get the other one for you. So it is tradition here on Adamcast that we have the guest smash the like button. I don't know why I did that. It just felt right.
Oh.
All right, I'm going to bring it over to you, and I'm going to come over. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Smash it. Smash it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. How good does that feel, though, right?
Oh, fuck, awesome.
See,
reminds me of my middle school days where we were incentivized to fight each other with boxing gloves. Because you were the cool kid if you won the fights.
Is this
school.
real? You're not joking?
This was on the block, man. Yeah.
Okay, so
and you can come back to school and you'd be talked about as the cool kid because you got into a fight because that's a good thing.
Okay, give me these Hulk hands. I feel like you might start reminiscing on your school days. All right, Salty, you're gonna have to wait till I put those back on you. That's cool.
Well, a lot of people say that homeschooling is bad because of socialization problems, right? But what about all those negative forms of socialization that I experienced in the middle school setting,
let's talk about that.
Incentivization to fight more people. It's probably a problem.
I feel that. I mean, that's interesting because that feels like the beginning of your story almost. So let's do that. Let's dive right into you. Where are you from and tell me about your middle school days that you were putting boxing gloves on and fighting.
This was the cool thing to do. Didn't you go to public schools too, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I went to public schools, but I wasn't putting boxing gloves on.
Yeah, I guess there's variations in quality of public school systems. That's another thing too. A lot of people think that the public school system is this great equalizer in society, but we all know that there are good public schools and bad public schools, and so it's far from an equalizer. And there's people that can afford the best public schools. There are people that happen to be residentially assigned to the worst public schools.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so where did you go to public school? Where are you from?
Yeah, so I was born in Sacramento. Okay. My dad was in the Air Force, so I moved around a little bit. I wasn't only in Sacramento for not very long.
Okay.
I moved to Colorado for a little bit, and then by the time I was 4, I was already in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, wow.
So that's where I spent most of my time growing up. I went through public schools all through K through 12.
Okay, so in San Antonio, you were basically most of your schooling happened there.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in San Antonio, you were getting in middle school, you were getting into boxing matches. And you actually mentioned something earlier that they would make fun of you if you didn't walk with a limp.
Oh, dude, you're not supposed to tell everybody all of my my dorky stories from middle school.
Though. I couldn't let go of it. I was like, wait, is this real? Did he actually say that? Because he kind of said it in passing.
Yeah, I mean that's and this is what I like to bring up when a lot of people say, oh, you can't homeschool because you're going to miss out on all those social skills. And what are you talking? I like to bring up, well, what are you talking about when they made fun of me for not walking with a limp? Or are you talking about when they made fun of me for not doing drugs?
Yeah.
Or
did they?
Or when we got incentivized. For the record, I won the fights, by the way.
Did you?
So yeah.
Okay.
But so at school, it was. Wait,
that was middle
socially.
School?
This was middle school. It was seen as a cool thing to partake in drugs. Wow. It was a cool thing to get into fights.
13 years old?
It was
12,
a cool
13?
Yeah. 13, 12, 11, 6th, 7th, 8th grade in San Antonio, Texas. And a lot of people were incentivized from social pressures in schools to join a gang.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we would do in middle school, I didn't partake in a lot of these things. And look, in
the drug side, but
but
you just admitted that you won the fight, so you partaked in the fighting.
I did some of the things, right, because it was kind of like an athletic thing, so I played football and stuff like that, and I ran track.
Status, right?
So yeah, I mean that was like it was a social status kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so I didn't win my social status through partaking in drugs and getting rolled into the gang. I mean, that was one of the common terms, right? You'd go into the bathroom, and if you got beat up in the bathroom, then you were part of the gang, right?
Okay.
So that's, another one of the experiences. So and I will say that, so if we can move from a little bit
go ahead.
out of the middle school years,
Keep it going.
we actually had some forms of school choice at the high school level in San Antonio, Texas. So that's one of the good things about the San Antonio, Texas education system.
How old are you now?
I'm 29.
29, okay. So this wasn't that long ago, like 15 years, 17 years ago.
Not that long ago. But we had a choice as to, you had a residentially assigned traditional public school.
Okay.
I will say I often refer to traditional public schools as government schools or government-run schools for a couple of reasons, because they're run by the government, they're regulated by the government, they're funded by the government, they're compelled by the government, you're assigned to them by the government.
Okay.
And they're not public in any meaningful sense of the word, right? They're not open to all, like a public park. Like if you walk by a public park, you can go to that.
Okay.
You're excluded from particular schools based on your residence, right? People have gone to jail for trying to get their children into better government-run schools.
Seriously?
Yeah. If you go to Google, I tell all of your listeners, Google "mom goes to jail, Ohio public schools," and then you'll see stories about this where families, particularly low-income families, trying to get their kids a path to a better life.
Yeah.
They see it as worth the risk to lie about their residence in their school applications so that they can get their children that better education. So that goes to show you that there's inequities by zip code. In the current system, your zip code essentially determines your school and your future in a sense.
So how did you have school choice when you were in your teenage years?
Yep. So in high school, we were able to pick some things called magnet schools. So that's one basic form of school choice, in that all of the schools are government-run schools. They're public schools by definition.
Okay.
They are operated by local governments, but you're not residentially assigned to them. So while they still have the government-run aspect that comes along with a lot of problems, at least they don't have the monopoly power associated with everybody is just forced to go to a particular place based on where you live. Now at least you can pick, right? So you introduce some competition into the system. And so we had four. We had like a business careers. We had like a health careers. We had a communications arts high school. That's the one I went to.
Nice.
And we had another one, like a business careers academy. Maybe if I went there, I would have more money now. But instead I come and talk to you about things on your show because perhaps I got some communication school skills through that school. But I saw like a real difference between that school and the one that I was residentially assigned to. So the one that I was residentially assigned to had a lot of the problems that my middle school had.
Did you go to that residential one first and then shift over?
Nope. When I was in 8th grade, they kind of let you pick. But if you didn't take the step to actually pick, you just go to your default residentially assigned school. But at least they let you pick something else. I would argue you should be able to pick any type of school. It shouldn't have to be government run, right? You should be able to take your education dollars like I did, not just to another government run school. You should be able to pick a charter school. You should be able to pick a pure private school. You should be able to homeschool if you want, and your dollars should follow you.
Can I ask you,
whatever
did your parents make the choice to send you to that other school? So their tax dollars actually shifted to a new spot?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But I will say schools are funded at the district level, and the school that I chose was in the same district. So the same district got the same enrollment count money, but more of the resources would go to that new school. And there are forms of school choice where you can go to other districts. So you can pick. There's stuff called open enrollment, for example. There's inter and intra-district open enrollment. So you could pick to go to another district, and in that case, the money would go to that other district.
Okay.
Not all of it, and we can get into the specifics into that.
Right, and there can be multiple schools in different districts. Like there could be 5 different schools in one district, where the districts would be getting most of the money, but then depending on where the parents chose to put their children, that's where the money would go. Okay, so I mean, it feels like we can talk about school choice, and I really want to get to that, but I still want to lead through. Where did you go after high school then? How did you end up, getting a part of the Cato Institute? What was your schooling path to that point?
Yeah, right after high school, I actually ended up going to a 4-year business school called Menlo College out in California. And again, I chose that because I thought that sports were really important, and it was a Division III football school, so I played football for them for one semester, and I wasn't good enough or big enough in particular to play for Division I school.
Does that mean you don't think sports are as important anymore?
No, I do. Well, I do think sports are important, but I do think that it shouldn't be your primary decision-making factor that goes into your college experience, and I thought it was important because it was so important in high school, right? You were the cool kid if you played football, and that's so true. That was really important to me. And I thought it would be the same thing at the college level. It ended up not being so important, especially at that school. Everybody played sports because it was a small Division III school. Everybody would go there to play sports, but I only went there for one semester. I ended up coming back to Texas the very next semester because my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. He's fine now. He's good. He's 5'10". He's multiple years out from any positive tests, so
that's good to hear.
Good news on him. So I didn't want to bring any bad news, but that's why I came back to Texas, enrolled at the I took one semester off actually, and I still ended up finishing pretty early just because I had a lot of AP credits through high school, which I do think is a good part of the public school system, allowing for some choice within the public school system and allowing students to get college credit. Is a good thing. It allows you to spend less time at the higher education institution. But I went after taking that one semester off to kind of hang out with my dad, and because I was really scared at that point, worried. Wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. And then after that, enrolled at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where I was very highly influenced by Professor John Merrifield.
Tell me about him.
He was my advisor all through my bachelor's and my master's, which both were at the University of Texas San Antonio. And he's an economist, and he's affiliated with EdChoice, which was formerly known as the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. So this was named after Milton and Rose Friedman, free market economists. And he was he's a free market supporter as well. He's no longer he's still affiliated with the University of Texas San Antonio, but I think he's retired as a professor emeritus now. But I took an economics of education class through him, and just a lot of economics classes with him and other economics professors there. And I really started to open my eyes to the problems of the education system. Residential assignment creates monopoly power. If the producer knows that they can get your money no matter what through the property tax system, and if they know that you can't go somewhere else unless you pay twice, essentially once through the property taxes and again for another service, there's high transaction costs associated with leaving. That school or that producer knows that they don't have to do that good of a job. And that doesn't mean that anybody in the system has bad intentions or bad motives or that they're bad people. It just means that the incentives are all messed up in the school system. And it's mostly created through the property tax funding, compulsory funding through property taxes, and then also the residential assignment. Just imagine if you were residentially assigned to your nearest grocery store, and by the way, imagine if it was run by the government or your nearest restaurant. They wouldn't have any incentive to do a good job, right? Because they know that they get your money regardless.
You have no choice.
So that light bulb going off.
Bing, you can turn it on. Hit the little button. Bing.
I didn't want to knock that light bulb going off in my head. Really got me super interested. And I was like, oh yeah, I was able to choose my school. Why shouldn't other people be able to choose their school? Oh, and by the way, why does the choice set need to be limited to government-run institutions? Where when we have other taxpayer-funded initiatives like Pell Grants or food stamps, even food stamps, I don't have to go to a residentially assigned government grocery store to use my food stamps. I can go to Walmart, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. Why doesn't the school system work that way as well? And that's really what just blew my mind. And I think other people's minds are being blown right now, because once you think about it in terms of these other programs, even Pell Grants at the higher education level, we can argue all day about whether we should have Pell Grants at all. But if we're going to have that funding, it should go to people. It shouldn't go to buildings.
Boom. Agreed.
And with Pell Grants, I can pick the state-run school. I can go to my community college, but I could also go to Notre Dame, a religious university.
Yeah.
With food stamps, I can go anywhere I want. With Social Security dollars, the money goes to the person, and we can argue all day whether we should have Social Security or not. I think that should be privatized. But if we're going to have it taxpayer funded, it should go to people. It shouldn't go to the building. And it shouldn't be a situation where you say, well, if you want to get this benefit, you have to go to the government-run institution that has no incentive to do a good job for you.
Right.
So this whole kind of opening my mind through an economic lens, I guess, and then just remembering my own experience through high school and how that opened opportunities for me, I think those opportunities should be expanded and given to other people as well.
It's interesting that you talk about when you learn about the economy and an economist kind of influenced you. I'm learning that more and more how important economists are. Like Thomas Sowell, for example, he was a Marxist. He admits it and talks about how he went from, being a Marxist to then, and they ask him why. He's like, well, I learned the reality and truth. I followed that, and then I was like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. And he became an economist. And President Trump is an economist. Like, he has a degree in economy. And the more you find out about the way our society functions, like how important understanding that side of things are. Like, the government is practically all lawyers right now. And I feel like there should be way more economists in the system, but there really isn't, because, well, like how you just explained it, when you really start to understand how the wheels are greased and the issues where people take advantage of the system, like you were saying, that once they know that they don't have to even do a good job, what is the reason? Why would they even care about doing a good job when they have the money rolling in? They're good. We got people trapped.
Yeah, and I don't think it takes an economist or an expert to understand these things, right? It just takes you and me, individual, everyday people that we interact with. When you have these conversations about, well, if we're going to fund something, shouldn't it go to the person so that they can make choices?
Yeah.
You don't have to really even get into the monopoly power argument. You don't have to really get into the deep economics. You can just talk about, what would you prefer, and if you start bringing up the analogies, it really starts to make sense to people. That wouldn't you think it would be ridiculous if we said, okay, well, if you want food stamps, you have to be residentially assigned to a government-run grocery store? Everybody would see that would be absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
It would be an infringement on individual liberty. And that's not me saying that we should have food stamps, but if we're going to have them, the money should go to people. It shouldn't go to an institution.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned monopolies, because if they're basically have become a monopoly, and giving people the choice almost takes the power away from the monopoly without even having to do anything with the monopoly. You know what I mean? Like, if all of a sudden everyone's like, you know what, I'm going to choose, and everyone diversifies their choices to all these different schools, then there's no one school then has just all this power anymore.
And that's a good thing, right? A lot of people who argue against like tech monopoly, or big pharma.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, we should break down big pharma. Joe Biden has said this on the debate stage. I think Elizabeth Warren said it on the debate stage during the primaries. I think pretty much all the Democratic candidates said, let's get rid of big pharma. But then
that's all talk, though.
But then when it comes to public education, they'll say they're just silent.
Right.
They won't.
We don't want to touch that.
It can't be a monopoly if it's run by the government. Yes, it can. It's a government-run monopoly. It's the worst kind of monopoly. At least with a private monopoly, you can still say, I'm not going to pay for that.
Well,
you can say, I'm not going to buy that, or I'm going to. Private monopolies are much more likely to be replaced too. Government monopolies last forever.
Well, you mentioned how they are going against big pharma, but look at what Trump has done. He's basically said he's not doing anything against big pharma. He just put a law that said if it's cheaper in another country, you have to sell it to American citizens at that price. And that's like not doing anything against the monopoly. It's basically saying that we have the right to we don't have to go drive to Mexico to get cheap insulin or, whatever medications. It's basically setting in place this. I know it's not exactly the same as choosing, but it's allowing, making these decisions outside of the big pharma or the big school monopolies that, it's taking the power out of their hands without doing anything to them, Yeah,
and another way to break down the big pharma monopoly, I think, is to limit the length and intensity of patents. Because then you could have more suppliers enter the market, and then you can have more choices for individual consumers to pick different creators of the drugs.
Yeah.
And then that'll introduce competition to lower the price. When you're a monopoly and you're the only person that has the legal monopoly on the production of that particular product, well, you're going to sell it for as much as you can.
I know,
right?
it's true.
And I think that's the main problem when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. But look, not all economists have it right on education. Some people who have taken like one economics course will try to make the claim that education or schooling is a public good, but they're absolutely wrong, because public good has a clear definition by Paul Samuelson. I think wrote something in the 1950s, but the Samuelsonian definition of a public good is that it has to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable, but schools are excludable and rivalrous in consumption. The easiest one to explain is excludability. You can prevent non-payers from accessing your school.
Okay.
Private schools already do it. That's evidence that it's not a public good.
Right.
And but I think what people mean when they try to make the argument that education is a public good is what they mean is that education is good for society, or it's good for the public. They get the words mixed up.
Yeah, which everyone can agree with.
Yeah, we can all agree.
Good.
And so if you want people to get a good education, you should allow them to choose the best school that they actually access a good education. So even if you buy that argument of positive externalities, the real term is that it's a merit good. It has positive externalities. In theory, I mean, there are some arguments that education has net positive externalities, but schooling might not, because schooling is not the same thing as getting an education. Schooling is often about obedience training, and it could cause a lot more harm than good if not done in a proper manner, and especially if you're not learning the material properly.
Right.
And so schooling could have net negatives.
Stuff?
I mean, if you're being abused on the campus, or if you're interacting with individuals that get you involved in gang activities, like my life could have went worse, right? If I would have, kind of listened to the peer pressure in the school system.
If you would have gone down the path of taking drugs at
a lot of
11, 12.
I know someone recently that went down a really bad path with substance abuse. And, I'm not saying that it's purely the cause of the school system. We can't really disentangle what the particular cause is. But if they're getting introduced to that thing, that substance at a young age, it obviously has somewhat of a relationship with it. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't be introduced later, but it's harder to break these kind of addictions and stuff if you're introduced to them at a younger age.
Well, especially when the human brain doesn't actually stop growing until, I think, 23 or 24, and then it finally is fully functioning. So any time before that, as soon as you introduce, alcohol, even any sort of drugs, you're altering. And we talked about ADHD. Kids in the class that at a very young age, they're like, that kid is clearly something's wrong with them. Like, let's give him some sort of control.
There's an over diagnosing problem, right? With
absolutely,
and that doesn't mean that ADHD is not a real thing.
Right.
It's just that at the margins, there could be some students who are diagnosed as ADHD even when they're not. Doesn't mean that all of them that are diagnosed at ADHD are misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
But this could come with problems with over-medicating individual students. And we can see kind of the incentive structure in the school system to say, oh, yes, you have this type of problem because of, one, the funding is tied to special needs status.
Right.
If you're a school that has more special needs students, you get more money.
Funding.
So one of the incentives built into the system, and there's not a perfect way to fix this, right? But this is just one of the unintended consequences with the system, is that if there's a kid at the margin, and if you don't know which way to call it, might as well, we're going to get additional money.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that anybody's, bad or even cognitively thinking about what they're doing. It could just be, unconsciously that's the call that they make. So because of those incentives baked into the system.
Yep.
And a lot of it has to do also with the fact that the school system is a lot about obedience training and indoctrination. The school system in America came from the Prussian school system in modern day Germany.
Okay, explain that.
The Prussian system was explicitly about creating obedient soldiers for the army and well subordinated clerks for industry. It was about creating people that could be easily managed in the economic system. So
basically like a proletariat, indoctrination system.
And that's how it started, right?
Yeah.
And so we had Horace Mann got a lot of these ideas. He's the modern day father of public education in the United States.
Okay.
He went to Prussia and learned about their system and brought a lot of the remnants of that system to the United States.
What year was that?
In 1852.
Oh, wow.
He passed or helped pass the first compulsory education law in the United States. I will say there was compulsory education in the U.S. colonies before that, also in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, one of those places that leads the way in statist policies,
Great.
at least when it comes to education. But in 1647, there was another compulsory education law in the Massachusetts colony called the Old Deluder Satan Act.
Seriously?
And
Oh
first
gosh.
when you hear this, it's like, well, why would they call it the Old Deluder Satan Act? Well,
Yeah.
it was a religious kind of argument for the compulsory education, was that if you can have a well-educated citizenry, they'll be able to thwart off the old deluders. His name is Satan. And so they called it the Old Deluder Satan Act, and they said, we need to compel people. They also had compulsory church attendance in some of the U.S. colonies, and the argument was, again, it was kind of like the schooling argument that it's a public good, that we need moral citizens in our colonies, so we're going to force everybody to do it.
Yeah.
And I would argue that good ideas don't need to be forced. And so if you're against the compulsory church attendance laws in the U.S. colonies, you should also question the compulsory education laws that we have in the United States. And if your argument is about this whole kind of public good thing and kind of benefits to society, you need to realize that that was the same kind of arguments that were put forth with the compulsory education religion laws as well. So you should at least question the compulsory education laws today if you do question compulsory religion, which I would say I don't think either one should be compulsory.
Yeah, forcing anyone to do anything all it leads is to people going, I don't want to be forced. Now I don't even want to do that, even if I had interest in it, So
yep. So Horace Mann passed that first compulsory education law in 1852.
Okay.
Every other state followed suit by, I believe, around 1920, and that's kind of the history of the compulsory education laws in the United States. It's kind of a staggered timing of the compulsory education laws by state. And I actually did a study with Angela Dill at Western Carolina University on the effects of the compulsory education laws, and we found, and this is in a random assignment study, you can't randomly assign different, it's not like a medical trial where you can randomly assign the drug or a placebo, because compulsory education laws were chosen in different states, but since they were staggered at different times, we kind of get a natural experiment, and we actually found that about 22 years after compulsory education laws were put into place, innovation was reduced, and we didn't have perfect measures of innovation, but we had the best proxies that we could find over this long time period, and that was patents per capita and output per worker, two kind of proxy measures for at least productivity and innovation. We saw reductions, and the theory there is that it could be that people were switching from homeschooling to formal structured factory model schooling, which could crush creativity and not foster innovative thoughts.
That's really interesting, because that's right at the beginning of like the Industrial Revolution. Well, almost in the middle of it, I guess. But as it progressed, I mean, think about nowadays. Just looking at it, what we have now. People want to be YouTubers. People want to be they don't want to be inventors. They want to be influencers and famous instead of back in the day. I'm going to
be a manager after I get out of this
system, exactly.
And so the system doesn't really prepare you very, very much for being YouTube influencers. And so if I mess up on this YouTube stream and do a bad job, it's because I went through the public school system for 13 years of my life. And,
technically, I'm the interviewer, so I will take the blame for that.
So if you mess up too, you have the same problem. But to bring it back full circle with the medication and the over medication with ADHD, it could have something to do with this overly structured nature of the public school system, this top-down structured factory model system, could be such a way that the teachers see it as a problem when the student is fidgeting in their desk. It must be a mental issue. It's not that you're not interested in. It's not that I'm not interesting or that I'm not engaging and getting you to pay attention to me. It can't be my problem.
Right.
It must be a problem with the individual student.
Yeah, we're all the same exact person. Like every human is exactly the same that can go through this system and be okay.
And it's so unnatural.
I agree.
Think
doesn't
about
make sense.
kids right before kindergarten, right? They're going around playing with things, and this could be an argument for more recess in the public school system, but that won't get rid of the problem that we still have the structured model of 13 years of your life. You're going through this system where the bell tells you got to go to this, and I know you were really working hard on that math problem, but right now you need to stop that, and the bell's telling you got to go to this next class, and you better be interested in reading.
Yeah.
And by the way, you better be interested in this very thing that I'm assigning to you, even if you want to learn about whatever else. If you want to be an astronaut or something when you're at a young age, you want to learn about space and string theory or whatever whatever you're actually interested in. Nope, right. You got to learn about Shakespeare right now because this book told us that Shakespeare is important, even though a lot of people don't use Shakespeare in the business world a lot.
Right.
And after they exit the school system. And so what happens is the child memorizes the information and they can regurgitate it on the test, but they don't actually...
There's no passion.
They don't actually gain that information, and it doesn't soak in.
Well, and you look at the history of human beings, we passed on knowledge to our kin. That's how, the name Smith. They were the Smiths. No one killed the Smiths because everyone, obviously most of humanity was war-torn, like everyone was fighting, but no one killed the Smiths because the Smiths would pass it on, and that was how knowledge went down. So if you were a Thatcher, your kids were probably Thatchers.
I knew someone with the last name of Fisher when I was in high school. So they were the fishermen, right?
Probably.
And my last name is DeAngelis, so I must have been like a clergyman or something.
Maybe.
Because it means of the angels.
Oh, really? There you go.
DeAngelis of the angels. So I must have been really important back in the day.
I want to get back. I want to get back onto your path though, because we know about you got through. You just got your master's degree, right? And you taken some economy classes, and you were really having this awakening about the system, the schooling system. Yep. So tell me what happened after this point.
Yep. Right after that, I went to another educational institution. Again, a lot of people might look at this and say, oh, Corey, you're such a hypocrite because, look, you went through 13 years of the K-12 school system. You didn't like it, and then you kept going after K-12 for 10 more years in post-secondary or around that amount of time. You got 3 more degrees after your higher education. And look, you can see the problems with the education system and still see the benefits of signaling. And I would recommend for your listeners to go check out the book The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan, where he has a PhD as well, but his main argument is that most of the benefits to higher education and the K-12 education through the school system is through signaling, not actually through skill acquisition. Some people have the theory that, you go through school in order to get skills, and then since you have so many new skills, that pays off in the job market. Kaplan's theory and the evidence that he provides is that most of the benefits actually, he estimates about 80% of the benefits come in the form of signaling.
Okay.
And that's just the piece of paper, right? The idea that, if you have a Harvard piece of paper, that's important. And the employer sees that and they see that, you can jump through hoops for a couple of years and that you'll be obedient and listen to them when they tell you what to do. So they hire you. And that's the economic payoff that Kaplan argues is mostly, and we all get it, right? Like when we go on to ratemyprofessor.com, for example, we choose the easy professor. Like the easiness measure is a good thing, right? And that's evidence of signaling right there, right?
Yeah.
Because the employer just knows your GPA and what school you went to. They don't know whether you actually learned better things, and more important things or not. So it pays off for the students to go on Rate My Professor and find the easy classes. I mean, you even have a hotness measure, like a chili pepper on Rate My Professor. Things that don't
like an attractiveness level.
Yes, So it's kind of creepy.
That is a little weird, I think.
I've never done a chili pepper rating system on
I thought you were going to say you never added the chili pepper. Like you never found any of your teachers attractive?
No, I haven't. So that's a good thing, but it has nothing to do with skill acquisition.
Agreed,
but it's important to the students, right?
What does it have anything to do with that?
And then there's
so many. It shows how far off the school's mentality or the students' mentality is. If that's what they're more worried about, if they're attracted to their teacher or not.
Well, and also think about if you went through the school system, if your school if you had a snow day, for example, in K-12, or through the higher education system, if you had after 15 minutes, there was a rule at my college, at least, that if the teacher didn't show up, or maybe it was 30 minutes, that the class was canceled.
Okay.
People would be like looking at the clock, right? And they're like, oh, look, we have 30 seconds left until the class is going to get canceled. And then if it was about skill acquisition, when it hit the 15-minute mark, everybody would probably go, man, we're not going to get those important skills from the school system. But instead, everybody would start clapping, right?
Yeah.
Because they'd say, oh, we don't have to do extra work, right?
Right.
And that's more evidence that it's all about getting the piece of paper, not really about the skill acquisition. And so that's the argument made by Kaplan. That's the argument that I buy into, and that's why I continued, because I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll make more money if I'll get the master's degree, if I get the PhD.
So let's get back.
Yeah, let's get back, and that's where I went. I went to University of Arkansas.
Okay.
They have something called the Department of Education Reform. It's a very great program. I would tell everybody to go through it. They actually pay their grad students.
Oh, nice.
And you can ask me on direct messages how much they pay. I had to go look up the exact number it is today, but it actually goes pretty far in Arkansas, because Arkansas is a very low cost of living state. It's in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is a pretty great little hipster town. It's fun. I would recommend anyone who wants to go to the Department of Education Reform to go check that out. But I went there because they were known to have pretty serious school choice researchers. And two of them who were on my dissertation committee, my main advisor was Patrick J. Wolf. We've written a lot of papers together. We actually started a paper the summer before I even started the program, because we had a very close interest and we had some data to look at. And it was actually, just as an aside, it was the effects of one of the longest standing voucher programs in the United States that was started in 1990, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. It's been around for since 1990, and we actually used data from the state mandated evaluation of that program and found that it was associated with reductions in criminal activity and paternity suits as well.
Interesting.
So that's another one of my interests. I like to look at the non-test score effects of these programs, because I think parents care more about non-test score outcomes and like character and character skills, morals,
setting you up for
activity.
Life. Yeah, that's what
the standardized test doesn't capture
be.
all that stuff,
right?
And so a lot of the people who argue against school choice, I agree with when it comes to the standardized test, because a lot of the people who want to protect the public school system, they'll say, oh, standardized tests aren't important measures. You shouldn't hold us accountable by standardized tests because they're not important. I'm like, yeah, you're right. But then why are you arguing against the school choice program based on the standardized test results? It's because you don't want the competition, and you're going to use any measure possible to try to bring down the competition. But I tend to think that, and just from my own experiences, that standardized tests aren't that important. It's like one time in the year, and incentivizing these standardized tests just incentivizes teachers and schools to teach to the test, which that's not real learning, right? Real learning is like when you and I are trying to learn something, do we go on YouTube and do a video and then say, oh, well, I'm going to create this standardized test and bubble in answers to make sure I figure. Sometimes you do that when you're trying to get certified for something, but that's just another credential. But if you're actually just trying to learn something that you're interested in, you don't go through and create a test for yourself. You just kind of have that
knowledge up.
Right?
Yeah, you go find it and get your hands dirty.
So I actually agree with school choice opponents when it comes to the standardized test thing. But so Patrick Wolf was my main advisor, and then also J.P. Green. He's been doing a lot of school choice research as well and since for many decades. And so I knew that they were there and they would be great advisors. And so I went out there. It's a 4-year program. I ended up finishing it in about 3 years. I think it was actually a little bit less than 3 years, because I got the job at the Cato Institute.
Oh, nice. Straight out of college.
Yeah, Jason Bedrick was a policy analyst at the Cato Institute, education policy analyst. And he's not now at EdChoice, which I brought up earlier, which was the Friedman Foundation. It's a school choice advocacy group. Okay. And he left, and they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, you should take Jason's spot. And I was kind of like, well, I'm finishing this PhD program. I'm technically supposed to be done in 4 years, and it's only like 2 years right now. But hey, I've already written so many studies that I can kind of put a lot of these together. And since they're mostly about school choice, I pretty much have a dissertation already written. So all I really need to do is kind of make the dissertation look pretty, make sure it's and make sure it's legitimate. And then also I need to finish some coursework because they had required coursework. So what I did is worked out a deal with the University of Arkansas to still be affiliated with the University of Arkansas when I left to DC to work at the Cato Institute. Yeah. And I finished my dissertation, the finishing touches on that. Part of that dissertation was that study of school choice reducing crime. I will say there are 4 other peer-reviewed studies linking school choice to crime.
Interesting.
I've done
I'd like
2
to
of them,
see
so
that.
there's 6 total.
Wow.
All six of them have found statistically significant reductions in criminal activity, whether through charter schools, private school vouchers, or open district enrollment policies. So all 6 peer-reviewed studies on the topic have found reductions in crime. They're not all random assignment studies. Mine aren't random assignment studies. They're rigorous matching procedures where you try to make as much apples-to-apples comparisons as possible. But a couple of them, I think at least 1 or 2 of them are random assignment studies that did random lottery, kind of like a medical trial where they give drugs, the treatment or the medicine to one group, and then they give the placebo to another group.
The control.
You can do that with charter schools and private school voucher programs, because when you have more people that want the seat in the charter school than there is available, they do a random lottery. So you can randomly assign people to the charter school medicine, and you'd randomly assign the people who lost the lottery, the placebo, to the public school.
Right.
And if you compare the outcomes, you can say it's because of the effect of the school and not the background of the parents, and not the student background, not the income level. You can be very confident, very high confidence levels that's the effect. Just like you can be confident that we know that this certain drug works because of the random assignment study.
Is that public? Can someone go read that dissertation?
So you can read the dissertation. I would just say go to the peer-reviewed studies. One is in the Journal of Private Enterprise. It's called Private School Choice and Character.
Okay.
If you just Google Private School Choice and Character DeAngelis, you'll find the study.
Cool.
Another one is Private School Choice and Crime DeAngelis. You'll find the study.
That's really interesting.
So one's at Journal of Private Enterprise, one's at Social Science Quarterly.
Yeah. And
then there's other ones like in the Journal of Political Economy, I think, that was that random assignment study that found similarly large reductions in criminal activity. It was if you won the lottery to go to a charter school in New York City's Harlem's Children's Zone, there was it was a complete elimination of crime,
100%.
Incarceration for these male students, because females aren't as likely to commit crime. So they looked at the male students, but it was a 4.4 percentage point reduction in crime. But that turned out to be, if you divided it by the control group, the treatment group, there was a 0%. So 4% to 0 is 100% elimination.
Yeah.
So that's where my interest has been with the school choice research. And then from then, I've kind of moved on to doing more op-eds while being at the Cato Institute and the Reason Foundation. These are think tanks for your listeners who are not very, who do not know what think tanks are.
Tell us about the Reason Foundation, because you're part of that also.
Yeah, so Reason and Cato are both libertarian-leaning think tanks.
Okay.
And so people that work for these organizations, they are both completely privately funded through donations. They're not private. They're not funded by the government like a public university would be. And we do policy research on the effects, like I was saying, like these school choice and crime studies. And each of these organizations do a lot of different policies. I happen to be the person who focuses on education reform, and in particular, I'm the director of school choice at Reason Foundation.
Okay.
I should probably change that to something like the director of educational freedom, because when I say school choice, I mean educational freedom. I mean having the dollars follow the child to wherever. It could be a school, but it could also be the homeschool setting, or like a pandemic pod or a micro school. It doesn't need to be a formal school.
Yeah. Why don't you break it down?
The definition
completely.
of school choice.
School choice.
Yeah. So the way I would define school choice in the easiest way is anything that allows the child's education dollars to follow them to wherever they're receiving an education. You can even call it education choice if you want, but most people just know offhand what school choice means. They're more familiar with school choice, so I just say that. That
sounds so simple. It sounds so obvious. Like, why wouldn't that be the way it is anyway?
It's because there's special interests that profit from having your money go to a particular institution, regardless of how well they do, regardless of your choice in the matter, and regardless of how satisfied you are with the product. And if you leave to a private school, they still get your money, and they like that. Of course, and that doesn't mean there's bad people in the system that are protecting the monopoly. It's a monopoly. Monopolies like to be monopolies. Right. That's just incentives, right? And so that's why we don't have as much school choice as we should. But we do have states that do have private school choice programs, and so I should break down the differences of the types.
Yeah, go ahead.
So anything that allows you to pursue your education by allowing your child's education dollars to follow them to whatever type of educational institution or learning environment works best for them. So that could be a private school. Everybody knows what a private school is. Charter school. Charter schools are defined as public schools, but they are privately operated. So they're independently operated, but they're kind of like a quasi-public-private school, I would argue, because they're very heavily regulated by the government. A lot of the times they need to be approved by the school districts that they're competing with, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. That's like saying, just imagine if every McDonald's got to decide whether a Burger King was going to reopen to open in a nearby location.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make any sense. Why should your competitor get to determine whether you open? So a lot of the times you had the school district saying, oh no, you can't open. We don't. It's not a good time to open this charter school. It's because they don't want.
Yeah,
their
they'll
customers
lose money.
And other times they'll say, oh, it's not high quality enough. And like, what do you mean by high quality? All these people want to go there. They have massive wait lists. Why don't you let the kids go to the school that they want to go to? Well, it's because they want to keep their money. Yep. They want to keep the money that's associated with the child. But then, they're heavily regulated by the government. They're private. They can be independently operated. So privately operated. They're very largely funded by public sources or taxpayer funds.
Yeah.
So like, they're very similar to the magnet school I was talking about that I went to, but it's not government run. So the funding follows the child to the charter school. But what's weird about the charter schools too is that the child doesn't get all the money in a lot of cases. From my latest study on this with Patrick Wolf, who is at the University of Arkansas, and a couple other co-authors, Larry Maloney and Jay May, we found that in the cities that we looked at, I think it was about 13, 14 metropolitan areas in the United States, the charter schools, and we looked at all total funding for the charter schools versus the traditional schools in the same city, they received around 27% less than the traditional public schools. So people, low-income families, charter schools are more likely to serve low-income families. They're opting out of the traditional public schools that are more well-funded, and they're losing a lot of their children's education dollars in order to go to this charter school. But then you have the other side saying, oh, we just need more money. Well, if money was what led to equality, well, then why are like thousands, and actually there's 3.2 million families, or students at least, students that belong to families that have chosen to go to public charter schools in the United States that happen to be usually a lot less well-funded than the traditional public schools. If it was about just pure funding levels, well, then why are people voluntarily going it's because it has more to do with incentives. The charter schools know that you can take your money elsewhere. They have to attract their customers. The traditional public schools, most often, especially if there's no charter schools or private schools around, they have a geographic monopoly.
Well, it's interesting too because you mentioned the whole crime statistics with it, and not only do these schools receive less money, but their production of like what they're pumping out as far as like actual education versus schooling. So that's what I'm really seeing. Like, these public schools are just schools. They're not actually giving education. Where when someone goes to a private school, you said it dropped the crime rate to 100, like by 100%, like that basically nil.
In that New York City study, it was a complete elimination of incarceration. My study in Milwaukee was about a 53% reduction in drug-related crimes.
That's huge. Also,
sorry for that.
50% is still an incredible number.
Reduction,
53%,
86% reduction in property damage crimes, and we also found about a 38% reduction in paternity suits, which we think have a lot to do with teenage pregnancies.
Wow.
And there are other studies that are very rigorous. One is a regression discontinuity. I'm not going to get into what that actually is, but it's the next best thing behind random assignment.
Yeah.
But they found families in Barbados, it's again not the United States, but they found that people who barely got into the school that they wanted versus the ones that barely did not, and you can kind of see how that's almost like random chance, right?
Yeah.
You barely got in versus ones you didn't, and they had a big enough sample size. They found, I think, a 59% reduction in teenage pregnancies. And that study from New York, they also found around a 59%. I don't want to give you an exact quote, but same finding, about
that's
59.
Huge.
And it has to do with that networking aspect and kind of the culture of the school and the discipline policies of the school as well.
Yeah.
So there's this whole, that's why we named our most recent paper Private School Choice and Character, because that's kind of what could be driving these differences so it could be like the development of character skills. It could be just different networking opportunities that you can relocate to peer groups that are not encouraging you to do drugs, like what I experienced in the school system,
early teens,
and then like
12.
the early teenage pregnancy thing. That's obviously it could be a problem, and it is a problem.
Yeah.
And there was another study that was a random assignment study in Colombia. They found that the children who won the lottery to get a private school voucher, they were much less likely to experience teenage childbearing as well. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I think it was like a 30% or more. It was another large reduction that leads to positive long-term outcomes. They also found about a 8 to 9% increase, I believe is around that, so don't quote me on this, but it was statistically significant positive effect on earnings as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we see all this evidence, and I try to stay away from the evidence-based case because those studies are based on averages, right? Studies have flaws.
Good point.
And like, let's say a study found that a kid who that won the lottery to go to a voucher program. Let's say it did reduce standardized test scores. Well, I would just look at that and say, well, one, people should be able to make decisions and correct those decisions if they make bad decisions.
Agreed with that.
But I would also argue that it's probably not a bad decision at all. It's probably just that families don't prioritize standardized test scores. And look, this is also the average. How do we know which families made the good or bad choice? You can never determine that even with a random assignment study because it relies on these big groups, the treatment group and so you can't tell.
Yeah.
Right? And so we shouldn't use science to grant educational freedom. We should have people making their choices, and we should trust people to make the right choices.
Yeah.
And on average, we should expect them to do a better job than the government and bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away. Why? Because families, even low-income families, care more about the needs of their children, and they just have more information on the ground about the needs of their individual children.
Yeah.
So we should not, lean too much towards this evidence-based argument because I think it's more of a moral argument for school choice, I think. So I got into a lot of these different types, charters, magnets. There's also open enrollment, which is different types of government. It's kind of like the magnet school where it's a different type of residentially assigned school.
But also privately owned.
The open enrollment is still government run.
Oh, okay.
So it's still government run. So it's kind of like magnet, but it's getting to go to another school that has residential assignment.
Okay.
That's open enrollment. And then also there's the private school voucher idea. This was Milton Friedman
tell me about
proposed
that,
this.
the voucher
so this
idea.
is probably one that's in the news a lot, right?
Yeah,
the
I hear
idea
that
of the
often.
voucher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was proposed in 1955 in an essay by Milton Friedman called "The Role of Government in Education." And he argued that, look, what we talked about earlier, there could be, benefits, social benefits of getting a good education. He's saying, I'm not even going to argue with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just buy that argument that there are benefits and positive spillovers of education. He called them neighborhood effects but that's what he was referring to.
Okay.
And he said, we could do that and we can still fund education, but we don't need government to run the schools. Just like if you think there's a social benefit to having a well-fed populace through food stamps, we can still fund it for the least advantaged, but that doesn't mean that we need to have the government run the grocery stores. That wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
So his argument was there's no compelling argument to have government run schools. We can still have government run the schools, but for whatever reason, that residentially assigned government run school or public school, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work for a particular family, they should be able to take some of those dollars in the form of a voucher. That's where the name comes from. It's like a ticket to be able to pay for a private school tuition and fees.
Yeah.
Or
at least
I
cut
think that's
the price.
Yeah, and
to
so
something more reasonable.
like for most of these programs, though, it's only a portion of what they would have spent in the public schools.
Okay.
So a lot of times these actually save taxpayer money. Same thing with the charter schools. Like I said, it's about 27% less than the charter schools. So if you
Right.
opt out of that traditional public school and go to a charter, you're saving taxpayers money.
Yeah, you're saving
and so
everyone
you're
money.
reducing government size and you're reducing government control by giving that choice into the hands of individual people.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win everywhere. And with the voucher, you can use it for private school tuition and fees, but I think there's an even better form of school choice beyond the voucher, and I call that education savings accounts, and that's what more people are pushing for. Rand Paul, for example, just introduced legislation called the School Act to Congress, and he would allow that money to go into a savings account for families, and the families would be able to get that money. Remember, before it came in the form of a voucher, the money would go into a savings account. And what the benefit of that is you don't have to use it for private school tuition and fees. So it really moves us from school choice to education choice. You can use it for the private school if that works best for you. You can still go to your public school. That would just mean all the money would still go to the public school because of how expensive they are. Mm-hmm. You could still go to the charter school and pick that. But if you want to do the homeschool thing, or if you want to do a pandemic pod, that's been a new thing in the news lately, that families are getting into groups of 5 to 10 children in a household to kind of outsource that process of homeschooling.
Cool.
To kind of offset the cost and pool resources together.
I actually haven't heard about this.
Yeah, so it's called pandemic pods because, a lot of people are seeing that their schools aren't reopening, and they're saying, well, we need to do something. We need the child care aspect. We need in-person instruction for our kids.
Yeah.
And look, I need to go back to work. So how about I still do homeschooling, but I do it in another home so I can still go to work. And if we all pool our resources together and, a couple of, let's say 5 to 10 families, get 5 to 10 students in a household together, that will make the cost of homeschooling a lot less.
Interesting.
Because children will get the benefits of homeschooling by more social distancing, the better interaction with other peers. You'll still get the social benefits that you would, that a lot of the positive social benefits you would get from certain schools. And then also, you can offset the cost and then have more of that student-centered, student-driven education that I think is one of the major benefits as well. But just imagine if we had education savings accounts. A lot of outlets like New York Times, Washington Post, Vox, Good Morning America. I mean, if you just Google pandemic pods, it's basically the idea of the one-room schoolhouse.
Okay.
I like to call it micro schools, but a lot of people think of it as getting back to that one-room schoolhouse.
Yeah.
But a lot of these outlets, if you just Google pandemic pods, you go to Google News, that's how I kind of get a lot of my news, it's a lot of negative stuff. Oh, this is going to create inequalities, right? Because the advantaged families are going to be the most likely to be able to exercise this type of alternative educational option.
Yep.
But then they miss the logical next step of, well, okay, let's let less advantaged families do the same. And the best way to do that is a lot of the money to follow the child to wherever they get the best education. Now, if you had school choice, education savings accounts, hey, if you're on the left and you support Andrew Yang, you could even call them UBEI, Universal Basic Education Income, if you want.
Right.
It's basically, that's the basic idea. And then more families would be able to fund this process and have access to these alternatives to the public school system. I mean, look, who's it going to hurt the most when the schools don't reopen? It's going to be the families, the kids also, and then the families who do not have the ability or the economic means, at least for the moment, to be able to afford these pandemic pods.
Yeah.
And
or even simply just not work to homeschool their own kids.
And so if you need to homeschool, right, you need to watch your children.
Yeah.
How are you going to return to work, especially if you're a household that relies on two incomes to get by, or if you're a single parent household? That's a problem, especially since, we've kind of structured our entire society for a long time where people have kind of, structured their livelihoods around the school system providing childcare. And now a lot of the schools aren't doing that. I mean, about 73% of the nation's 100 largest school districts are choosing not to provide any in-person instruction this school year, including Philadelphia City Public Schools, where we're kind of close to.
Yeah.
They're doing completely virtual learning, they call it, and that's just not going to work for a lot of families, especially the families who need the child care aspect. And that kind of just goes to show you too that one of the main benefits of the school system is the child care aspect. It's not even much about the education for a lot of people. Is that one of the main benefits is, well, I need to go to work.
Yep.
And I need somewhere to watch my children. Oh, well, the workers are saying they're not going to watch my children. What am I going to do?
Right.
And I would actually say a lot of this has to do with incentives too, because the grocery stores have been open the whole time. The workers have gone back to work.
Certain grocery stores.
And you didn't see the grocery store workers, protesting in large number. You don't see them now going on strikes, right? And if they did, though, I think it would be okay for grocery store workers to go on strikes, but you'd be able to take your money elsewhere.
Right.
If your Walmart didn't reopen, you could go to another Walmart, or you could go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. You could take your money elsewhere.
Yeah.
But they have an incentive to reopen and do it in a safe manner, an effective manner, and a timely manner, because they know that customers can take their money elsewhere. We've seen the same thing with the private schools and the daycares
competition.
too.
Competition is the reason we went to space. Competition is the reason we have most of our technology, because it was about a race to be the first person to do it, so we can make money / we can run that industry, versus our enemies. That's how it used to be. Like it used to be a different country we were against. Like the space race was us versus Russia. So now that's basically what I'm seeing about this. We need to enter or add the whole competition system into the education system, so that people want to fight for the money and be like, we are the better educators, so you should send your kids here, instead of having a system where we don't have any competition. You have to give us your money.
Well, I mean, just think about it. The private schools are fighting governments to reopen. The public schools are fighting for governments to keep them closed.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
That highlights the difference in incentives there. The private schools know that you can take your money elsewhere if the virtual education isn't meaningful, so they either do a kick butt job on the virtual education, or they have an incentive to reopen in person. There's actually examples of private schools fighting in-person school closure orders in places like Dane County, Wisconsin, and Sacramento County, where I was, around where I was born in California, where one private school in California, for example, they tried to get around the order to close the private schools down so that they can, provide meaningful services to their families by rebranding as a daycare, because the daycares were okay. It's okay to reopen daycares, but for some reason it wasn't okay to reopen the private schools. So it's like, okay, so if you're doing the learning part, does that make you more susceptible to does learning increase your risk of contracting COVID-19? So they actually rebranded by retraining all their teachers as daycare workers. But you see the public schools teachers, not all of them, some want to go back to work, but a lot of them are pouring into the streets and protesting, and they're bringing a lot of props with them. For example, they're writing fake obituaries to the governor.
I saw that.
They have the tombstones. They have the fake body bags in DC, where I'm from. They put fake body bags in the front of the DC public school offices to protest reopening. And I actually will say that this is a rational response, and it might sound weird for me to say that this is rational to do, because it seems like pretty crazy thing to do. But from a individual just benefit cost analysis decision-making framework, you know that you get the taxpayer money regardless of the type of experience that you provide, right? So your incentive is to stay closed, because I'm going to minimize the risk of the virus, even if it's very, very small, and I'm not going to forego any. We're not going to forego any of the cost, right? I'm still going to get the same paycheck. I'm going to still have the same job security, and I'm going to be able to do so from the comfort of my own home, even if that means having negative repercussions for the customers, that is the families and their students.
Yeah.
And so from a cost-benefit decision-making analysis, the teachers are actually, doing something that could be argued to be rational from that standpoint, because they don't lose your money if you go elsewhere. But in the private sector, they have a different set of incentives. That is, we need to serve our customers. And that's what it should be about, right? It should be about,
absolutely.
It shouldn't be about the institution. It should be about the customers. And that's how it is in the private sector. That's how it should be with the school sector as well. It already is that way with the private schools and charter schools too. If you look in DC, they're not reopening the schools until at least November 6th.
Why?
And when Mayor Bowser was questioned about this, they actually asked her, did the teachers unions have anything to do with this decision of delaying the reopening of schools until November 6th? She responded with this.
Seriously?
Yep, 4 seconds. I counted 4 seconds of a pause. But no, then she started, because she was probably like, oh man, the media's hitting me with this question.
Oh no,
right?
What do I say?
What do I say about this?
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie about it. But then she kind of skirted the question a little bit, but then she did note somewhere along the lines, and I have this on my Twitter, I shared the video, where she says, we do have significant workforce issues to deal with for sure.
Goodness.
And workforce issues to me says it has to do with the teachers unions, because she didn't say it didn't have anything to do with the teachers unions. But then another reporter asked, did this delay reopening date to pushing it back to November 6th have anything to do with the trends in the transmission rates of the virus, or the the risk of the virus?
Did it have anything to do with the virus at all?
Her first response was no.
Okay.
She said the word no. Sure. And then she said, then she got into, she started saying that I wouldn't say that the health metrics are the only thing that went into this decision. And that she reiterated the fact that they had workforce issues to deal with.
Of course.
And the charter schools, which are less likely to be unionized in DC, they're sending me stuff in the mail saying, look, we have these options available to you. I know you might be a parent. I'm not a parent at the moment.
Right.
But they have different options, right? You can do this, 2 days in person a thing. So I don't think that a lot of them are doing full time in person, but I think a couple of them have that available. But they have earlier start dates. And then they also have options for families to, if you want to do the full virtual, you are absolutely in your ability to choose that.
Yeah.
But you could also choose if you need, some more of the in-person days as well. And I think that has to do with competition and union influence, which we can get into.
Super
how
important.
the school reopening decisions across the country are actually
look at this. This is an article that this is your article actually, right? Yep. By you and Christos Makridis.
Yes, and so his guy's really smart. I got to tell you, he's an MIT-affiliated scholar. He's also an assistant professor at the Arizona State University, but he's really good with stats and numbers, and I thought I was really good with stats and numbers. And I've done a lot of these econometric, papers, but if you I'll just tell the readers, if you go look into the actual paper, it's called "Are School Reopening Decisions Linked to Related to School Union Influence?" So you can find it on Social Science Research Network if you want to see all of our tables of results and all the figures. And he did a really good job putting that together. But I will say we found a database of school reopening decisions that's available at Education Week. They have data on 835 large public school districts in the United States. It's not all of them, but it does cover about 38% of all of the public school students in the nation. So it's not all of them, but it's the best
chunk.
data set that we have on the topic right now. And it has districts from every single state plus the District of Columbia, and it covers a large portion of especially the large districts. But we found statistically, after controlling for a ton of county level characteristics such as the age distributions, the race distributions in the county, the income, household income in the area, COVID risk as measured by cases per capita and deaths per capita in July, and a whole bunch of other control variables. And we found that in all of our models, no matter how we looked at the data, no matter which controls that we included, and we also included politics as well, the percent of Trump voters in the county in the 2016 presidential election, which Brookings Institution, another think tank, found similar results to us, but they didn't throw in the union variables in there. But we've looked at this as many different ways as we could, and we used 4 different measures of union power. One was the union membership at the state level, union membership at the county level, union strength as measured by a strength index or ranking constructed by the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. And we had one more, whether you were a previously known as a right-to-work state or not, whether you had where you were compelled to pay union dues or to participate in a union, which was the case before 2018, the DeAngelis decision, which we can get into as well, which is a Supreme Court decision in 2018, which dealt a large blow to the power of the unions. But so we use these four metrics.
Okay.
And we found that school districts that were in places with stronger teachers unions were statistically less likely to reopen for in-person instruction based on all 4 of these different measures. So, for example, you look at a place like Florida, which is a very a weak teachers union state, it's relatively weak. I wouldn't say that the teachers unions are not powerful there. They're just less powerful than other states, right? And about 75% of the school districts in the database in Florida are reopening with some type of in-person experience.
My friend
Florida.
lives there. He's got 4
they're
kids.
Much more likely.
And they're open.
And
they go to school. I mean, it's a private school though.
Yep.
So they are fully going to school 5 days a week. Everything's
so that's
up and running.
2 things, right? You have Florida where they have less influence by the teachers unions, but then you have the private school aspect of the competition. But look at places like California. Only 4% of the districts in the database, I think they had like 69 districts available in California. Only 4% of them, only a couple of them, plan to reopen with full-time in-person instruction available to all students.
Can I ask why do the unions want it closed? What is the reason,
Same thing that I was getting into a little bit earlier about how it could be argued to be rational to keep the schools closed from the standpoint of the teachers union members, because they're getting the same benefits in terms of pay and job security. They're not going to lose their jobs, especially if you don't have school choice in town, right? You know that you don't have a competitive pressure to reopen, right?
Right.
And so they're trying to maximize the benefits to the union members, but the problem with that kind of thinking is that the teachers themselves are not the only stakeholders in the education debate. This is forgetting families and their children, right? This is completely forgetting the needs of children. And I would argue that each individual district should be able to make their own decision. They should be able to choose whether to reopen or not. But we also need school choice at the same time, so that if they don't reopen, they're free to make that decision if they want. But I should be able to take my children's education dollars elsewhere to somewhere that actually is going to educate them in the way that I believe is meaningful for my child.
Yeah.
And so look, you do you, but let me do the same thing with my children by allowing their education dollars to follow them wherever. And look, a lot of people who argue against school choice at the K through 12 level, they argue for programs that fund individual people in other sectors and even in education. Think about Pell Grants that I was talking about earlier. The left typically supports expanding Pell Grants, for example, right? And they also tend to support pre-K programs.
Okay.
So with Pell Grants, the money goes to the person. You can pick private or public. You don't have to go to a residentially assigned, government-run university. With pre-K programs, the money tends to go to the families. Families can pick, right? So the funding's a little different, right? And they support these programs typically. And then on the other hand, there's fierce opposition to the K through 12 vouchers. It's the same thing. Why should it be any different? The money should go to the person, and that family unit should be able to make those decisions.
Follow the money.
And the only reason that I can think as to why you would support why someone would support Pell Grants and pre-K programs and food stamps, but not support K through 12 is because there's a special interest group that knows that they get your money regardless where you don't have that same kind of power dynamic at play with pre-K programs and Pell Grants, because the kind of the norm is that you have more choice in pre-K and higher education than you do in K through 12. The norm or the default in K through 12 is that people are residentially assigned to these institutions. Those institutions get your money no matter what. And I would think that if the norm in higher ed was free college for all and all the money goes to a residentially assigned college, you would similarly have unions fighting against Pell Grants, allowing people to take that money to go to different universities. You would have that same, it's all about the power dynamic.
It's all about the money.
And so look, what we found in this study makes sense, right? A lot of people said on Twitter that, when I shared this study, they're like, oh, it didn't take a study to do this. Like, we all knew that the unions were pushing to keep schools closed.
Yeah.
And it makes sense from a theoretical standpoint, right? They're trying to maximize the benefits for their members, but they're not taking into consideration other people in the world of education. But look, it's good to put some data to the issue and see that the data are kind of confirming and supporting that theory.
Yeah. So let's get into some of these the people that are getting upset with school choice, right? So I got a little list here. The first one that that really stands out is school choice is a tool for segregation. Now that one, because when you think about it, it's giving more people, doesn't matter what your race is, a chance to go to what they want to choose.
I mean,
right?
that's a failure to understand the default option, right? Just think about the government-run schools or the traditional public schools. Because they're assigned based on zip code, we already have highly segregated public schools in our system today. So it turns out, if you look at the evidence in the private school choice literature, at least, that when families actually get private school vouchers, it actually tends to lead to more racial integration. There are about 9 studies on this. EdChoice has summarized this research. 8 of the 9 studies have found net integrative effects of school choice programs because the default option already is highly segregated.
Right.
And look, if you look at the history on this, a lot of people will try to argue that school choice was rooted in segregation, that people wanted integration. So there was segregationists in the 50s who fought against school choice. And I would point listeners to an article that details this history in the Journal of School Choice by Phil Magnus at AIER and his co-author Chris Suprenant. And they've detailed this history as to show that there were people who were arguing against school choice because they were segregationists themselves, and because they knew that allowing other populations to use their money to go to a private school would lead to more racial integration. And Friedman theorized this as well. If you look at his early essays, he theorized that it could go either way. Yeah. But he theorized that he thought that because our public schools are already segregated, this would lead to more racial integration. And as you can see, it does by the evidence presented by EdChoice. And also Elise Swanson published a peer-reviewed review of this literature as well in the Journal of School Choice. If you want to look at that, it was published in 2017. So it's a pretty recent review of the literature. Private school choice tends to lead to racial integration. Now, when you get to charter schools, the evidence is more mixed. But people I don't think people should even talk about individual schooling selections that are voluntary as segregation. So a lot of people will look at charter schools and then they'll say that because more minority populations are concentrated in charter schools, they will look at that and say that is segregation. But I would argue we should call it something else. We should call it stratification because it is a voluntary choice. We shouldn't conflate it with this disgusting thing that governments have done in the past, and that they have forced people based on the color of their skin to attend different institutions.
Man,
so we should call voluntary. We should draw a difference between voluntary activities and forced coercive activities through the government. And just another example of this that most people wouldn't call segregation is historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs. No one really looks at an HBCU and says this is a huge problem, that this is segregation. And they don't say that because it's a voluntary choice.
Right. Okay, I see that.
So people should be able to make these choices.
Right. They should have the choice to make. I mean, all I can think about is Joe Biden's stupid comments about the different. I mean, he's had many.
He opposes private school vouchers.
I'm sure he
DC.
does. Well,
and
that doesn't surprise me.
I mean, what's funny is Joe Biden is a school choice hypocrite. And I actually have a map at the Educational Freedom Institute.
I have that here. Let me pull this up for us.
So we actually have the school choice hypocrisy map at
look at
Educational Freedom Institute. So and Joe Biden, if you scroll over Delaware, he's there.
Here, let me bring it over so you can see it.
And we call these people in power school choice hypocrites because they exercise school choice for their own family by sending their own children through to private schools. And in the case of Joe Biden, he also attended private schools himself. And I don't blame him for that. I think it's great that families are doing the best they can for their own family situation and to try to get their children a better education. The problem that I have is that they're doing that and exercising that choice, and they obviously think private schools are good for their families, but then they close the door behind them to prevent other families from doing the same thing. And let's be real here. This is preventing lower income families, the least advantaged families in society, from being able to exercise that option. Look, rich people already have school choice,
I'm
right?
so sick of it. What's true for thee, but not for me. Look, of course you have Nancy Pelosi here. You know, we've talked about her going to get her hair did. You know, it's that was. I'm in the public eye. It's like, and who cares? Like, you're not someone special above everyone else. So it's crazy.
Let's get to Joe Biden's specific policy proposals against school choice.
Go for it.
He had that big list of 110 pages with the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force is what they called it.
Okay.
And on school choice, they didn't say to eliminate charter schools. They said to heavily regulate them. They wanted to do the McDonald's Burger King thing to allow more public schools to regulate their competition, which is another barrier to entry, which is the problem for families. It limits the options available to families. But then he had some other arguments against for-profit charters, which I think is a total problem as well. Because look, most charters actually aren't for-profit. Only about 12% of them are actually for-profit. But I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with profit, honestly, because if you're gaining a profit through voluntary individual selections, I think that's a good thing to incentivize good behavior. But look, the public schools profit every single day. You have textbook publishers in the private industry that are profiting from the public school system.
Yeah.
You have the public schools profiting from force through the residential assignment and through the taxation, the compulsory funded through property taxation.
Right.
So they profit, but in a different kind of way through force. And I think profit should be determined based on voluntary selections
and competition. It's because these people, if they're not in the public realm, they actually have to produce a good school to show that they're going to make a profit. So if they're working and they're successful and they're making a profit, that's because they're doing a good job educating the kids instead of a public sector where they don't have to, it's not reliant on how good the kids are, educated coming out of the system. Right.
Yep. And that's totally right. And with Joe Biden to get more on his Unity Task Force, he also called to get rid of the Dc Voucher Program that has been around for quite a while in DC, and it's targeted to students who come from low-income families. If you look at the average income of students, of families of students who participate in this program, it's about $27,000 per year in DC, a high cost of living area, and 95% of the students using this program are identified as Black or Hispanic. And then you have Joe Biden calling to get rid of this program that serves disproportionately disadvantaged populations of students, and then also this program isn't like it's costing a bunch of extra money to taxpayers either, because like I said earlier, it's funded at a much lower amount than the traditional public schools. The traditional public schools in DC, you want to give a guess? How much they spend per child?
God,
over $31,000 per child. If you want to fact check me,
go to
per year. 31. Wow. Give me that money. Give me that money. I'll use half of it.
$30,000 a year per student. Like, so many people could. I mean, imagine. I mean, that's almost that's
more than most private schools.
I was just gonna say that's almost like a fairly good salary per year for most Americans.
And guess how much the DC voucher children get when they opt out of those public schools. They only get $9,500.
I was going to say 10 grand.
It's about 10 grand. It's about
Wow.
a third of what they would have gotten in the traditional public school system. I want to say, well, why should they lose $20K just because that traditional public school wasn't working for them?
And the public school actually gets to keep that $20K? Like, it doesn't matter?
It depends on the school funding system, but it actually turns out in most states, every state that I know of, they actually get to keep a lot of the money. I don't know if they get to keep the total $20K, but in places like Texas, for example, if you go to Georgetown University's Edunomics Lab, they have a website on something called student-based dollars, where they go through most of the states in the U.S. and they try to look at how many of the dollars are based on student enrollment counts in the public schools, because public school funding is largely based on student enrollment counts. If you get more students, you get more money. If you lose students, you lose some money.
Okay.
But in places like Texas, for example, only 2/3 of the funding is based on 68% of the funding is based on student enrollment counts. What does that mean mathematically? It means when a student leaves to another school district, or if they leave to California or somewhere else, that individual public school district actually gets to keep about 32% of the funding. So they actually profit on a per pupil basis. They get to keep a lot of money for children who are no longer there. So on a per pupil basis, mathematically, they end up with more money per child left behind. And same thing with the vouchers. So you're getting funded at a lower amount, and just mathematically, just based on these state funding formulas, those traditional public schools are guaranteed to get a lot of the money for students who are no longer there. Just think about how ridiculous that would be with any other system.
It is.
When I leave
It's
Walmart, and even if I'm using a taxpayer-funded program like food stamps, they don't get to keep 20% of my food stamps if I go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. Everybody would think that would be ridiculous, and Walmart,
sounds pretty ridiculous.
Walmart would be happy about that,
of
right?
course.
They'd be like, "Oh my goodness, we get to keep 20%."
Yeah.
The reason is because currently they don't get to keep 20%. The public school system, the reason that they're not all happy about it and up in arms about it is because they currently get to keep a lot more than 20%.
Right.
And they don't want you to take any of your money. They want to keep all your money.
Well, the fact that they're keeping any of it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, they'll make the argument that, we got to keep the lights on, we have buildings to maintain, but Walmart could make that same argument. How do they cut costs? Well, they cut wasteful spending, and they shape up or shut down. And that's how it should be with the public schools too. They have to look. I mean,
yes.
When you're making these, we got to keep the lights on argument. It's kind of, you would have to buy another argument. The premise of that argument is that that the public schools are just extremely efficient, and they're spending their dollars as efficiently as possible, and there's no way that they can make cuts anywhere because they're so efficient. But the reality is,
there's no way.
Private schools lose students, and they have to deal with it.
Yep.
The charter schools lose students; they have to deal with it. And that's kind of the point of competition, right? We want them to kind of think about what we got to do.
Yeah.
Because that incentivizes them to do better.
Exactly.
And if you look at the literature on this, and look, I don't like to make the evidence-based case much, but we have to.
You have to sometimes.
We have to grapple with the evidence, because I think the moral case is stronger. But I'll tell everybody on this show, I don't cherry pick the evidence. I'll give you the full body of evidence. So there are about 28 studies on this topic that looks at what happens when public schools face competition through private school choice programs. About 28 studies on this. 26 of 28 find statistically significant positive effects on the children who don't even use the school choice programs, the ones who remain in the public schools. Why? Because the public schools start to think, well, maybe we don't want to lose 50% or 80% of the money. Maybe we want to keep it. And the only way to do that is to keep you from leaving, so they're incentivized to change their game and to do a better job or shut down.
Boom.
And so that flips the whole incentive structure in the system. And so this large body of evidence, if you want to look at it, it's summarized by EdChoice. They call it the 1, 2, 3s of school choice. They have a ton of evidence on this, but there's also a peer-reviewed meta-analysis of the same body of literature, and that is published in Educational Policy. They do something called a meta-analysis, where they pool all of the effect sizes together, and they find that on average the effect size from that competition is positive. So, but I would argue, I mean, a lot of people will argue against school choice that, what about the kids left behind in the public schools? They'll be worse off. One, my argument is no, they won't be, because those schools get more money per child. They shouldn't. You should be able to take all your money to wherever, but they still do have this buffer where they get more money per child. 2, the competitive effects evidence is positive, but then 3, that's not even a legitimate argument to make. My freedom to choose my child's school should not hinge on the competitive response of a government-run school. That's like saying you shouldn't be able to take your food stamps to Trader Joe's because, well, the Walmart shoppers are worse off because they're losing some money.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is they're actually better off because that leads to incentives to improve. But then secondly, that's just not a legitimate argument to make to restrict my freedoms based on the response of some other institution. You can't shop at Whole Foods because Trader Joe's is, that's hurting their customers because Trader Joe's or Whole Foods isn't responding properly. That's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
And let's just be real, the higher income families are still able to exercise their choice. The only people who are disproportionately affected by these kinds of arguments are the low income families who can't afford to switch out of this failing school that's not working for them.
Yep.
And look, the track record on this in the traditional public school system is that just throwing more money into the system doesn't lead to better outcomes without competition. I mean, we've increased real inflation-adjusted per pupil education expenditures in the U.S. since 1960 by, you want to guess how much percent?
I have no idea.
280% on
I wouldn't have guessed that high.
Inflation-adjusted basis.
Wow.
So we've nearly quadrupled real per pupil inflation-adjusted expenditures since 1960. You might say, 1960 is a long time ago. So since 1980, we've nearly doubled it. Since 1990, we've increased it by about 40%. And what's interesting, though, there's a report that's probably one of the most cited reports that I know of in this area by Ben Scafferty. He's a professor at Kennesaw State University. And he found that between 1992 and 2014, real per pupil expenditures have gone up by about 27% in the United States.
Okay.
But real teacher salaries actually dropped by 2%. So when teachers are kind of getting mad about they're not getting paid enough, I can see why they're getting upset.
Yeah.
And it's because the traditional system doesn't have an incentive to spend money wisely. If they did, they'd spend more on the teachers.
Agreed.
But what Ben Scafferty found was, they just started to increase the amount of people in the building. So they started to just create more jobs and create more, kind of like a jobs program.
Yeah.
And that's beneficial for the union bosses, right? Because
more people have to pay union dues.
More union dues, you got it. And then also a larger voting block. So now they have more political power, but this doesn't benefit individual teachers union members in terms of higher salaries.
Or students, really.
So I would argue that the incentives of the union bosses are not well aligned with the teachers, and the teachers should be fighting for school choice, not against school choice, because school choice gives the schools stronger incentives to pay them more. There's only 5 studies that I know of on this topic that when school choice competition comes into play, and this could kind of weave into that other body of evidence I cited, but these researchers have looked at the effect of school choice competition either through charter schools or voucher programs or private schools on the public school teacher salaries. They go up. Why? Again, just because of what I theorized. That the public schools start to say, well, we're going to lose money. We better start spending money wisely, put it into the classroom, towards the customers, towards the students, and by the way, the teachers are in the classroom as well. That benefits teachers too. That's that body of evidence. And there's another argument for why this might be, it has to do with monopsony power. And we all know about monopoly power, right? You have one producer of the service. Monopsony is where you have one purchaser of a service, one buyer. And the idea here is it's usually talked about in labor markets where you have one kind of employer where the employees just essentially have to accept the costs and benefits that go along with that particular field or job. And in the school system, at least at the K through 12 level, there's essentially a government monopsony in play where if you want to be a K through 12 educator, most of your options, 90% of your options are in that system. And you essentially got to accept those costs and benefits in that system if you want to be a K through 12 educator. Or you go to a private school, but there might not be, there's not as big of a market for private schools
yet.
And so the employer doesn't have a strong incentive again to retain the best talent by giving them higher salaries and then also giving them more autonomy and benefits. So I've argued that school choice benefits teachers too. I mean, the evidence is aligned with that.
It makes sense.
The clear theory makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean,
it forces them to spend their money wisely. It forces them to basically fight for, be in a competition to want to be a better school, public or not, because now there's other schools that are vying for the money, vying for the good teachers, vying for the parents to choose them instead. So therefore, these public systems have to basically step up and be like, all right, we got to teach we have to cater to our students, we have to cater to our teachers, we have to spend money wisely. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the main arguments against school choice, people will make, and they'll focus on the needs of the institution.
Yeah.
Like they'll say things like, "Oh, school choice defunds public schools," or "It siphons away money from public schools." To which I respond, "Well, if you think your public schools are so great, then why are people going to leave when given the option?"
Right.
Why, so you're admitting that when people are given the option, even if they're given less money than what they spend in the public schools, they're going to leave?
Yeah.
What does that say about your public schools? I thought you said that public schools are great. We don't need school choice because their public schools are so great. But then they admit right away, "Oh, this is going to defund our public schools," to which I'll respond, "Well, you get to keep a lot of the money. You shouldn't get to keep any of it. So you benefit financially on a per pupil basis."
Yeah.
But then school choice doesn't defund public schools.
It's not
Public
just taking
schools
the money
defund
away.
Public schools defund families.
Right. That's a
It
more
doesn't
accurate
belong
statement.
to the public. That's like saying, well, allowing people to shop at Trader Joe's defunds Whole Foods. Well, I guess you can make that argument, but it doesn't belong. My money doesn't belong to Whole Foods.
Right.
It belongs to me and the institution that I choose. So it's just a weird way of thinking about it, saying that, oh, school choice defunds public schools. Well, one, do a good job. You won't lose any money.
Boom.
Two, it's not your money to begin with. It's the child's dollars. The education dollars are meant for educating the child.
Mm-hmm.
It should go to the child, to the family, to wherever the child is getting an education.
Agreed.
It shouldn't go to a bloated bureaucratic system. And so that's just a totally ridiculous argument that I've heard from the other side, that it siphons away money.
It's interesting to just take a step back, right? Let's not talk about school choice and look at basically what you just said. Taking money from a bloated system. We can almost apply that to almost anything right now in this day and age, right?
I mean, have you thought about when people call for defunding the police?
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking in my head. I'm like, these people they want to defund the police, and you're saying, they want to, well, we can't defund public schools. Well, then why do you want to defund the police?
The disconnect's interesting here, isn't it? So
Yeah.
a lot of the people who are calling to defund the police are arguing that the police aren't doing a good job, so we should reallocate the resources elsewhere, right?
Right.
And you can make the argument that incentivizes the police to do a better job. And for your listeners, I have a pretty interesting paper that's published at Libertarian Papers called Police Choice, where I actually support this idea of picking your police departments, which is essentially kind of like redirecting dollars. It's not defunding police by taking it out of the system altogether, but kind of like having a school choice voucher, but a police voucher to say, if you shoot an innocent person and you have bad actors, I can incentivize you to do better by taking that money to a different enforcement agency.
What, like a private, like a sheriff office or something?
Or it could all still be government run, just kind of like the charter school idea or magnet school idea, like where I went. You can still have it all. It doesn't even have to be private. I would argue private's the best way to do it.
Okay.
We've seen private police done historically. We have private police in places in the United States today, but we're getting off on a tangent. But the idea here that they argue is that this will they're doing a bad job, so we should defund them. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to education, they'll say, oh, yeah, I know we're not doing a good job, so we need to add more money into the system. We need to properly fund our schools.
Yeah, exactly.
But why don't you stay consistent and say, oh, well, if this school's doing a bad job, why don't you incentivize them by allowing people to not defund them, don't reduce overall spending levels, but say, let people allocate their dollars elsewhere to incentivize the schools to do a better job.
Right.
And I see another kind of disconnect here with this logic when it comes to this kind of conversation about policing. I will say that I think the police need a lot more accountability. That's why I've written this huge paper about police choice, kind of taking the ideas of school choice and applying them to policing. But there's another disconnect when it comes to teachers' unions and police unions. There's a lot of people, when a lot of this, what's been going on in the media lately is people have been saying, the police unions are a problem because they protect bad actors.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think you agree with that too, right, Adam?
Yeah, I do.
And that doesn't mean that all police are bad. There are heroic police, there are good police, but then there are bad police too. And we need to be able to hold them accountable, and we need to be able to incentivize the police that are doing a good job, that are de-escalating things in a nonviolent way, and if they're protecting people in a safe way and doing a good job, and if they're coming when you call them at a fast rate.
Yep.
And so the unions protect the bad actors, though. And then when it comes to the teachers, it's like, okay, well, let's apply that same logic to education.
Yep.
The teachers' unions protect the bad actors. So you got things like with the rubber rooms in New York City. And then you have like where teachers are paid the same amount regardless of their quality levels. You have so you have the unions fighting against things like performance pay. You had the National Education Association, which is the largest teachers union and also the largest labor union period in the United States.
Okay.
And they actually they actually had a kind of a internal voting thing that they put to vote, and it was about restructuring their mission to be about educating children properly, and they actually defeated that measure.
Oh.
So that just goes to show you it's not really about the children, right? It's about protecting the union members, and that doesn't mean they're bad people
Or the
right? It's
union
just they have a
income.
different job of what they're trying to do. They're not trying to maximize the well-being of students first and foremost. And that
I think
ballot
that
measure kinda shows
sums
that.
it up most. I mean, it's not about the students. That's what school choice is about bringing it back to the students, making sure that the education system is going to benefit not only the students, but the parents of the students. Everyone comes out ahead. When you have a good, solid education system, your society is going to thrive better, right? So,
and the best way to do that is to have the money follow the child to a place that they're actually going to get a good education.
Yep.
And that, I mean, I've gone over a lot of the evidence, but, the main, I think the best argument for school choice is to put to people the proposition that, well, if you're against school choice and you want to fund the institution rather than the individual, you need to explain to me why you're for all these other programs that does fund individuals and allows individuals to choose. Are you telling me that you would rather have people funded through food stamps be forced to spend those dollars at government-run, residentially assigned institutions? Most people would say, oh, no, that's absolutely ridiculous. We shouldn't do that. We should allow people to choose. And then, okay, well, if you can't explain why you think that funding should go to people, why shouldn't this funding go to people? Especially when we do it in other sectors of education as well, or other levels of education.
Well, I think the problem is most people don't have the time to fully understand and fully grasp of what it all means. The power, like, I feel like I'm just getting a grasp of it now, and we've done, a solid hour and a half of talking about what it is, all the different statistics and the intricacies of what school choice really means. So, I mean, you think about an hour and a half, and I still don't fully grasp.
It's already been an hour and a half? What the heck?
Yeah, it has.
We still haven't gotten to the church and state arguments and stuff where people, anti-religious people don't like school choice.
Well,
too.
why don't you explain that real quick?
Yeah, I'll just preface this by saying I'm not a religious person myself, but I wholeheartedly agree that people should be able to freely exercise their religions and choose the religious education that works best for their family. And you should be able to go to church if you want, but that's not something I partake in.
So you're
myself.
referencing a specific tweet that someone hit me up, and I've got it right here. And it says, I'm just going to read it. Maybe ask him about folks that are using school choice, in parentheses, as an end run around separation of church and state to funnel money into religious organizations. How will the budget work? Reducing student body in one school by 10% does not reduce the cost by 10%.
To get to the second part of that, we already kind of talked
we
about.
already
They've
hit
already
that part
talked
up.
about the budgetary implications.
Right.
That it's not my responsibility to figure out how the schools are going to fix their budgets when they lose students. Just like it's not my responsibility to fix Walmart's budget.
Well, we went over
Let's
that.
get into the
religious part of it.
The religious part, yeah. I mean, are they against Pell Grants? Because Pell Grants could be used at private religious universities, and that has nothing to do with the established. What they're making a claim about is the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That
freedom of religion.
Yeah, so people usually say that this is a separation of church and state kind of clause of the U.S. Constitution, and they'll say that the government shouldn't be directly funding religious establishments and establishing religion that way. And that's kind of like the argument in the Constitution.
Yeah.
But Pell Grants are not unconstitutional as far as the separation of church and state argument goes. And the reason for that is because the money goes to the individual parent.
That's what I was thinking.
And the parent, so it doesn't go
it's
from
the, parent
government
choosing.
to the religious institution.
Yeah, exactly.
And so because you can choose, and the Supreme Court has ruled on this at the K-12 voucher level as well. There was a Supreme Court case in Ohio that was about a voucher program.
Okay.
And they ruled on this already, and they ruled that because the money goes to an individual person, not directly from the government to a religious institution, and because people have choices, they can still pick the public school, they can pick a private religious or non-religious school.
Right, they're choosing to send their kid to a religious school.
And just think about other programs. You have taxpayer money through Social Security, right? When you retire,
Mhm.
that's public funds in a sense, right?
Okay.
Or taxpayer
Sure.
funds. And you can use it to pay for private school tuition at a religious school. That's
So
not
same thing.
unconstitutional, right? It's because the primary beneficiary and
Mhm.
is the family unit,
The parent.
and it's passing through that family unit.
Yep.
And then also there are privately funded private school choice programs too, called tax credit scholarships that don't even involve public dollars at all. So that's another reason that those particular institutions do not have a separation of church and state issue. And same thing with food stamps. You can use food stamps for groceries that can be used at religious ceremonies. Does that mean that there's a establishment clause issue? No, there's not.
No, it's
And
letting
so-
the people run their use their choice, their freedom. That's what this country is about. Is you get to choose.
Yep.
So school choice is almost giving the power of education to the choice of the parent, which actually leads me to another question that I have here, and it's basically it parents aren't educational experts, so who's to say that they aren't making a terrible choice?
Yeah, the government bureaucrats aren't educational experts either, are they? Look at our proficiency levels in the United States. I mean, the 2018 Nations Report Card came out a month or two ago,
Right.
and our U.S. history proficiency was only about 15%. So give me a break. The bureaucrats aren't doing a good job in the public school system.
Well, and we talked
But
about
look,
it. They're mostly lawyers.
Well, and also, look, they don't have the on-the-ground knowledge that the families have about their own individual
Good point.
kids. And
Needs
they
of their
don't have the
children.
same incentives that families do. So families have
True.
much stronger incentives to get it right than the
Yeah.
bureaucrats in offices
That's a
hundreds
good
of miles
point.
away. And that doesn't mean that the bureaucrats are bad people.
Yeah.
It just means that they're not in the best
They're
position
disconnected.
to make those. And let's think about other services. I'm not a mechanic, but I can pick a mechanic to go fix my car.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor. I can go choose my doctor.
That's a good point.
I'm not a fashion expert by any sense,
I mean, you
but
can
I can go shop
you can
at
apply
the
that
mall.
to
I'm
literally everything.
And how do people
Right.
get by on a day-to-day basis by making
Right.
their own decisions? Well, it's because of heuristics. You can look up things. You can ask your friends. I can say,
Yeah.
hey, Adam, what's the good restaurant in the Philadelphia area? And you can kind of give me a couple of pointers as to where to go eat after this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be an expert in culinary arts, and I don't need to be a chef myself to be able to pick restaurants. So give me a break with this argument about education. You have to be an education expert
Yeah,
to be
I
able
thought
to
that
talk
was-
about
I thought that was
education and
silly
make
too.
education choices.
So look, we are kind of running out of time, and we've got lots of super chats. So I would like to be able to get to these and then answer some questions if
let's
anyone
go.
hit
5
hit
hours.
us up. So
I know you don't want to do
well,
that.
thank you all for hanging out with us. I really have been enjoying this chat, and I honestly really wanted to get into education itself too, because I feel like that's a whole nother conversation about, because you kind of mentioned education itself needs to be reformed because we're teaching the wrong things. This has really been about the freedom to choose where you're getting the education and not just going to school. And I think that in itself is incredibly important. So thank you for really explaining that side of it to me and to get it out there, because I feel like this is what people need. They need to have it explained by someone who clearly knows what it's about. And, so I hope if you know anybody who is in this situation that has kids, that is wondering what to do with them and understanding, what to do about your kids. There's what are they called? Pandemic
Pods. So if you go to Facebook, there's a group called Pandemic Pods.
Yeah.
And over the last 2 months, they've already gotten over 41,000 members of
Wow.
families doing this, trying to look for options
That's awesome.
and getting tips. There's
Yeah.
another group on Facebook called Learn Everywhere.
Okay.
So if you just Google that, I think it has like 20,000 members doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out, okay, the schools aren't opening. I better figure out what
Let's
the
do
heck
it.
to do for my children.
Let's teach our kids.
School choice would be one way to help them figure it out. But then also there's tips and tricks that you can
Yep.
learn in these individual groups in your communities. And I think that's the best way to do it.
It's amazing.
All
right, let's get into these super chats.
Yeah.
I know you're like running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I know you
There's
you
so many
could probably
things
keep
to get
firing.
into.
I
There's a lot
know.
there's a lot of things we missed, like the
Yeah.
schools charging for daycare. But we can get
I know.
into that another
Yeah,
time.
we just don't have the time. Yeah, I feel like we could rap out about it for a while. All right, so we're just gonna jump into these. Matthew Hammond says BLM attacked Kaitlyn Borisenko in Dallas. She is okay. I did see this. And I guess a couple people are tweeting about it. Chet Chisholm says, Adam, you should reach out to Carlin and check in on her. Be good to have her on again and talk about what happened today. So right as we were going live, about 6 minutes beforehand, I saw this. What happened was she was attacked by a group of BLM. Do you know who Carlin is? Borisenko? So
No, I
she was
haven't
actually my
looked.
first guest. and she's a psychologist. She's been joining in the walkaway movement, and she was in Dallas. I think it was Dallas, and they got attacked today. It's pretty intense. So I did reach out to her. She hit me back, and she's okay. So I'm just gonna keep moving though.
It's crazy.
Hydro says, check out the 48 Laws of Power book. Law 1: never outshine the master. When you show yourself in the world and display your talents, you naturally stir up all kinds of resentment. Yep, it's a good rule. Blazing Swayze says, Trump boats sinking in Lake Travis. Did you see that? So there, the Trump parades that are happening all over the place.
So this is in Austin.
I don't.
Travis.
Is that what it is?
I grew up in
Lake Travis in Austin?
So yeah, it's close.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
awesome.
There was a few boats that sank, but it sucks whenever that happens. Randy says, just a regular guy like myself, Adam. Your commentary and your views of the world are like my own. Keep up the good work, my friend. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate you. Archmagirius says, God bless you, Adam. Your message is great, and I love the work you're doing. Read about Our Lady of Fatima. I know you'll find it fascinating. Pray that this madness comes to heal. Ave Maria. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. I'll check it out. John says, please ask Corey, what effect, if any, do the AFT and NEF have on education nationally? What is that?
Yeah, so there's a literature on this. If you go into my study with Christos, the MIT scholar that we linked the union influence to the reopening decisions, there's a whole body of literature on the effects of teachers' unions on student performance. And so most of the evidence is null to negative. So I just think from a theoretical perspective, I think that's how we should address these questions, that their main priority is teachers unions or teachers benefits in terms of
what is AFT and NEF?
American Federation for Teachers. It's the second largest teachers union in the U.S. has 1.7 million members, and the NEA is the largest teachers union.
Oh, okay, so it's the two largest teachers unions. Okay.
Yep, and look, in theory, it should lead to worse student outcomes if they're not advocating for policies that put the needs of students first. And the literature on this it mostly leans null to negative.
Okay.
There are some studies that find positive effects. They have questionable methods, but mostly negative.
So I mean, it really is just they're going to lose a lot of their power if school choice
and
goes
look,
into
if the
effect.
union, and look, I have no problem with the unions, existing.
Yeah. And
especially if it's in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
But I need to be able to take my money elsewhere if the unions are advocating for policies that are hurting kids, right? That's the more important thing here, right? You should be able to advocate for whatever policies you want. Yeah. But let me take my money elsewhere if you're going to advocate to strike and not open up the schools.
Yeah.
And if you're going to advocate to, not have as many hours of instruction for my children, or if you're not going to have performance pay, I should be able to allocate my children's education dollars elsewhere. That would fix most of these problems.
Right on. Part-time Dreamer says, tell Wella and Paul to squash their beef. Wella and Paul, squash the beef. I don't know what that means, but I hope you stop fighting. RJ, thanks for the super chat. Never Stop Fighting said, oh my God, Adam, look at Carlin from Walk Away last video. BLM attacked her 57 minutes ago. I know, I saw it. I did talk to her, and she's fine. She's back at the hotel. She made it safe, so. Chet Chisholm says, ADHD comes from a chronic lack of dopamine in the brain. This makes it harder for those with it to stay focused as their brains keep trying to find more stimuli to trigger the dopamine release. That kind of, everyone's different. We are all different, and we're all built differently. So some people need to have a job, a function in society that gives them that dopamine kick. I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit here, but schooling, because there is a difference. That's what I've really learned. I've taken from this. Schooling versus education. Like, we need people to have an education, and education can look so different for anybody, right?
Some would argue that schooling is actually antithetical to education.
Right, exactly.
Not that it's just one path to education, but some people will actually argue that it's antithetical and harmful to education. I mean, just think about how we learn today, right? Yeah. Before we started schools, how did we learn to walk? After we look up things, after we left the K through 12 system, we look up things, we read books, we follow our interests, and so much of the traditional public school system is not student-centered. It's kind of top down, from the teacher down, pouring information into your head and telling you to memorize this.
Learn it.
It's not based on interest.
And then, we talked about the guy in the back of the room. or the girl, whatever.
When am I ever going to use this? They were right.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you're not going to use this stuff.
I was the obedient kid too. I was the one that was really good at memorizing things and regurgitating information. But even then, when I learned things, it was before class or after class when I was at home, because I think that's just more of a conducive environment, that when it's based on the time that you want to do it, that you're more likely to absorb the information.
And isn't passions, that's what you really want to drive what you end up doing in life. You want to find a passion and that's what they say, follow your passions and you'll be happy. You never work a day of your life because you end up, just doing your passion. And that's not what they teach in schools. They teach you to basically be babysitters. They're just babysitting you until then you get into a factory-like life. Because when was it created? 1855, you were saying?
1852, the first
1852,
education law. Yeah.
And then look at what society was. That's why I said it was basically like a
industrial
proletarian factory. That's what it was, pumping out proletarian workers, to just work in the factories to get used to it, then send their kids to the system, just keep it going, keep it flowing. But we're in a different time now, So, all right, well, I want to get back to this, though. So let's see. Chet Chisholm again says, I'll send them ADHD info. I speak from experience. This is actually a normal super chatter. Chet, he lives in Canada, and he's a medical worker, so he's got a lot of expertise in this. Let's see. Angela says, some people are not capable of homeschooling. My maternal grandfather was illiterate. He was born in 1913. Well, some people, they still having the choice is still what I think that's what we were talking about today.
I think we'd be surprised at the abilities of people to be able to do the K through 12 learning environment, even if they don't have like a bachelor's degree or a high school degree. Even they may surprise us with the abilities that they can have at least at the lower grade levels. But then also they can outsource it. I think that's the easier
teach themselves. You're talking about.
To teach their children,
right? Okay.
Even if they don't have like a credential per se, they may still be able to do it. But then if they don't feel comfortable doing it, no one's saying that they should have to do that.
It's true.
They should be able to outsource it to another home.
Yeah, good point.
To like a micro school.
All right, let's see here. Viperius says the schools in the country rated number 1 in education have the students for half the time a day, or in parentheses a day, that UK and American schools do, and most of the time spent in their school is recess. I mean, we talked about ADHD and letting people, use their energy, and then when you come back and you do more mental work, you've gotten the physical like aggression out, or even just excitement, whatever. Northrise says, ADHD person here. Number 1, ADD is real. I've observed different chemical responses to caffeine. 2, I consider ADD an adaptation to the information age. ADD kids are bored because school is too slow. That also could be the case, and there's, my wife, for example, went to a musical high school. Like her whole high school was based on understanding music theory, and they learned other things, but it was, you got to choose that. And we were talking about the different kind of schools that, you got to choose from. So that's what school choice is. It's essentially, there's going to be schools out there that will cater to your children significantly better, that will allow them to, have recess more often, if that's the case. I don't know.
And if you're not interested in it and you're not happy with it for 13 years, it could be hell for students, right?
Yeah.
It could be. Just think about the amount of autonomy you have in the school system, right? You have to ask to even go to the restroom.
Yeah.
So children have very little autonomy. And it's the amount of autonomy that people would never accept in a job today.
That's a good point.
Right? Like, even a lot of people don't like to go to work each day, but they even have more autonomy than they did in the school system.
That's true.
So it's really, it could be depressing, right? Going through the school system and not being happy or excited about what you're learning.
Yeah.
And being stuck there, right? Because you
there's
might
no
not have
passion
a choice
behind
to get
it.
out.
Yeah, you're being forced. No one wants to be forced to do anything, right? All right, let's see. Hank Van Het Internet says, my solution for education is opening the set education paths and training people based on their needs with a training method that most fits them. I sent you details a while ago in an email. Interesting. And that's really going in tune with like kind of having the passions drive where you want to educate yourself. Because we talked about it. How do we educate ourselves now? Like for me, example, I spent this year learning the political side of life. And I never was political, but I didn't go to school for it.
Whoa, they didn't teach you all this stuff in school. How did you figure it out,
How did I figure it out? I just did it on my own.
I mean, just imagine.
I just paid attention. I watched everything happening.
Just imagine if we started compulsory schooling at 6 months of age. Everybody would start saying, "Oh, well, how did people learn to walk if we don't send them to schools?"
Yeah, good point.
So like a lot of people say like, "Oh, how would you learn to do math without schools?" Well, you'd follow your interests and you'd learn it in other ways. Just like with walking, if you don't have to go to the compulsory school to learn how to walk.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's see. Special Beanie, I like your name, says, "Hey guys, you guys should check out the YouTuber MAGA X Star. He often criticizes school and how TV shows and movies can prepare us better for life than the school system. Although I don't know if I necessarily agree with that part of it, because I do feel like TVs and movies have their own faults in the way we are raised with certain movies. Take Disney movies, for example. There's always an antagonist. There's always, the love of your life at the end of the movie. There's always this, I don't know. It's so not reality. And most movies aren't reality. It has to compel the story. Reality can be kind of boring sometimes. And nothing is as grand as movies and TV shows. So they make it seem so much different than what reality actually is. So I feel like the fault lies with school, TV shows, and movies. All of them have part of that. What do you think?
So Adam, you brought up politics a second ago. I just wanted to add another one of the main arguments for school choice is that there could be political indoctrination occurring.
Actually, we should talk about,
which we didn't hit on yet.
Let's talk about. That's important.
Throw that in there.
Go ahead.
That a lot of the arguments for school choice throughout the past few decades have been that the public schools aren't doing very good on the test scores, they're not doing really well on math or reading.
Yeah.
But there's a whole other aspect to the debate that the public schools could be indoctrinating your children in a certain political persuasion, and it could go either way, right? There could be some public schools that are too left, too right. And
so this is the map that you've got. And tell me about real quick. This is the EF Institute,
Educational Freedom Institute.
Okay.
It's I'm the executive director there. It's a school choice think tank, a 501c3 nonprofit. But we make the arguments for school choice, and one of the ways to make the argument for school choice here is that you shouldn't have to pay for and send your child to a school where you believe that the teachers are indoctrinating your children in a certain political persuasion.
Yeah.
And in this one in California that you brought up is this teacher in a public school in California actually admitted over several years on Twitter, they thought it was an anonymous account. It actually was an anonymous account, and people were able to figure out who she was.
Yeah. That's
crazy. She was openly admitted throughout over years that she taught students that Republicans were fascist, that Trump was a fascist, the Trump administration was a fascist regime in her words. And perhaps the most alarming part was that she argued that, or she admitted on social media that she stopped teaching both sides.
Yeah.
Because I may not have much of a problem if you have your own political kind of ideology into the classroom, as long as you present both sides. And if the kids are only getting one side of the story, that's political indoctrination. And I mean, we saw something similar in Philadelphia Public School District, pretty close to here, in that on social media just a couple of weeks ago, there's a guy named Matthew Kay, who is a public school teacher in Philadelphia. I think he's in the Philadelphia School District.
Okay.
And he was super worried about the virtual remote learning plan because he started pointing out in a Twitter thread that, well, now the families are going to see what we're teaching the kids. And he was pointing out that there was some social justice types of topics that he wanted to teach. And he pointed out that, the conservative parents are going to get really mad if they see what they're teaching. And that,
that was like
in a way, the virtual education thing could be one of the benefits of that is that teachers can now, or parents could start to see what's going on in the classroom. Yeah. And I think that's what ticks a lot of parents off, is that they shouldn't have to send their children to a place where they feel like they're being indoctrinated. In some cases, we have examples of true indoctrination where they're openly admitting that they're not teaching both sides. And I would have a problem with this, just to be clear, if it was families saying that, everything positive about conservatives and not presenting both sides. I would have problems with that too.
I mean, when I saw that, I've seen few videos of this. Like there was some teachers, I think in Seattle, maybe Portland, one of those two cities. It feels like they're just pumping these kind of people out. And there were two teachers, and someone was asking them, like, so what do you teach your children? And they're like, well, we teach them about how there's racists everywhere and how we need to, be aware of our skin color and how it affects other people. And they're like, that's not like the curriculum. They're like, well, we don't follow the curriculum anymore. We just teach whatever we feel is important. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Do you even know what year America was founded? And they couldn't even answer. They were like 17. That was the answer.
Yep. And I want to point out
my
that,
gosh.
just to be clear, my main issue with this is the choice aspect, that when people are forced into these institutions and forced to pay for them, that's the problem. So, for example, there was a recent news story about a charter school that opened, a choice school, that had kind of like some social justice curriculum and kind of a theme in their school. And I was okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, because people aren't forced to go there. You can choose to send your children there if that's what you're interested in, but no one's forcing conservative parents to send their children into that school. And so I think that's great that people should,
as long as it's transparent.
It's transparent, and if there's choice involved in that, you're not forcing families to go into a particular type of institution.
Let me ask you, do you remember any political talk from any teacher that you in your life at all?
Not really, no.
I can say the same exact thing. Not one
seems
time
like, it
did
seems
I
like
ever
it's a
have
bigger
that.
thing now.
Yeah, why are these, unless it's part of the curriculum where they teach both sides, and because I feel like politics should actually be a little bit more prevalent. Teaching taxes should be part of this. Like, I had taxes is something you gotta learn by yourself too. It's not taught in school.
No, we only need a squared plus b squared equals c squared every year, and we only need to know that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. That's it.
It's so silly, yeah.
I mean, of course, you could use those things if you go into like engineering or
sure.
biology, but for most people, you don't use it, and if you need it, then you can learn it later if you need it.
Exactly. If you go into it, you'll learn it in those classes. So, all right, let's stay on this. Where were we here? Hydro says, your friend is such an intellectual, but I bet he is not very logical. You seem rather logical to me.
Yeah, I think so too. I would say so.
I'm
not using emotional arguments, really. I'm using logic.
No, I haven't heard
science,
emotion
data.
from you.
Yeah, thanks.
So, but you are very intellectual, and I guess we're friends now.
Boom.
I'm okay with it.
And your name is my middle name.
Is it?
I bet you didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, my middle name is Adam.
That's all right. See, we've got more in common than I even knew.
I think my dad wanted to name me Adam.
Really?
And my mom wanted to name me Corey. Mom won Corey, and then Adam.
Corey Adam.
Maybe more families do that too.
That's a good vibe.
I've known
it
one
rolls
other
off the
family
tongue.
that's
Corey
done that.
Adam. I like that.
Oof.
That's not bad.
Adam of the Angels.
All right. Let's see. Political Pothead says all demos want school choice. Any solutions? Besides abolishing Department of Education, my great-grandmother's maiden name is DeAngelis. What up, cousin Corey?
Boom.
So what is what do you mean by all demos want school choice? What does that mean? Do you know?
Is he saying all demographics want school?
Maybe, yeah, all demographics.
Yeah, I mean,
that would
if
make
you
sense.
go into the Education Next polling and the American Federation for Children polling on this, they do nationally representative surveys pretty consistently.
Yeah.
And all types of demographic backgrounds, whether you look at different races, the majority supports private school choice initiatives.
Yeah,
it's
why
the
wouldn't
unions
it?
that push against it. And they also break it down by union member versus not. If you look at union member,
all of them do.
It's the highest category of percentage that do not like school choice.
Well,
and
that's not surprising because they're losing all their power.
And look, families fight really hard to keep school choice regardless of their backgrounds once they get it. They almost become their own special interest group. I mean, you look at it
makes sense because the future of everything is our children. Period. You cannot argue that the future lies with our kids because we don't live forever. That's a fact that people love their kids. They want the best for their children.
Absolutely. And school choice shouldn't be a partisan issue. I want to make that clear too. Even though it kind of is right now, you have Trump very supportive of school choice. You have Republican congressmen introducing school choice bills like Rand Paul and Tim Scott.
Yep.
But we do have a bipartisan school choice bill in the House. It's the House version of the Senate's School Choice Now Act.
Okay.
That is, it has like 2 or 3 Republicans and then one Democrat on board. But most part, Republicans are much more likely to support school choice. But it shouldn't be a partisan issue because, look, there's market kind of reforms into it. This could benefit taxpayers as well. there's really no arguments against it, and it leads to more equity. And if you're saying that you're the party for more equity and giving disadvantaged families more opportunities, this does that.
Yeah, school choice is a direct connection to giving most people the equity that they are fighting for right now.
It's a win-win solution. There's literally no loss except for if you only
the union members,
monopoly.
Only the unions losing money.
And there might be some union members who are okay with the competition because they're confident in their product, and
they should be.
But it's probably the lower quality ones that are fearful that they might lose.
They actually have to do
But as I said, the union members should even be striking for school choice too, because it gives their employers incentives to pay them well.
That's a good point. Yep. All right. Let's see here. Giorgio says private school versus homeschool. Well, homeschool. Yeah, we talked about it. If you're going to homeschool, why would the public school get the money? You should get it and help perpetuate what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually have a hierarchy of private, home versus charter. I think as far as like freedom and like sectors that have that are best for education versus the most regulated and theoretically the lowest quality on average, it would go like this. It would be like unschooling / homeschooling at the top that I think is the best, and then private schooling and kind of the micro schooling model.
Yeah.
Micro schooling probably kind of goes with the homeschooling because it's very similar.
It's like the pandemic
and then
pods.
Charter schools, which have more freedom, less freedom than private, but a little bit more freedom than the traditional public. And I think the most restrictive and the theoretically least lowest quality that's least conducive to success is the traditional public school. So that's kind of my hierarchy. But I think everybody should have the choice because the public school might be best for a particular.
Good point.
For an individual.
That's the key.
I'm talking about averages, but your public school may be a very good public school that's very innovative. You should be able to choose that.
Yep.
But I think that I would like to homeschool in the future for my. I wish I was homeschooled, but I just think that that's probably the best way to kind of really get at true education rather than just schooling. And, schools can kind of do things to get going towards that direction.
Yeah.
It's harder to do it in a school setting, I think.
All Metal Mike says, great guest, Adam. Thank you for all the great info, Corey. It's great to hear someone in education who is open-minded. Excellent. Yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate you. Nathan says, Carlin was attacked. She posted a video about an hour ago. Did y'all know if she's okay? She's okay. I got word from her. I quickly reached out to her. We were about to go live, and I just wanted to see if she was okay. She hit me up. She said she's at the hotel. She made it back safe. Political Bothead again says, charter schools show teachers' unions are corrupt. I mean, I'm pretty sure we gathered that. And that's one thing I'm taking away from this.
Charter schools are less likely to be unionized. They tend to get about the same or better standardized test score outcomes, particularly when you look at the the random assignment studies. The most rigorous studies tend to show that the charter schools do best. If you want to look at a meta-analysis of this evidence, it's Betts and Tang 2019. Two researchers have compiled the evidence on this. And then also Ron Zimmer and his colleagues produced a working paper on the overall evidence in 2019 at Annenberg Institute at Brown University, an education working paper series that they hold. They've kind of done the evidence.
Your dissertation, when you were doing the crime statistics, what was that school in the Bronx? Was that a charter school that they were comparing it to?
Charter school. In Harlem
like a public regular school versus a charter school?
Yep, relative mostly to traditional schools. I will say it could be that you end up in a different charter school.
Okay.
But they have a way. There's a way to make the comparison traditional public versus because you can do something called instrumental variables. It'll take too long to explain, but you can essentially get the effect of the charter school, not just the winning of the lottery.
Yeah.
So you can really get a better comparison of different sectors. And I believe they did that instrumental variables kind of thing in their study too.
Okay.
Results are about the same. It just becomes bigger when you do that.
Yeah.
So the bigger effect.
All right. Jackson says, I have always unschooled my kids. My oldest will get his GED at 16 and become an electrician like his dad. His choice. Electricians get paid $80,000 a year in our area with no school debt. Trades are forgotten. You know what? It's true. They are, and they're incredibly important. I grew up in my father owned his own HVAC company, so I learned a lot of the trade system. All his friends, he had all those kind of trade guys. They got their friends. They have one friend who's a carpenter, one friend that's the electrician, one the concrete guy. They always have like all their friends are just like different people of the trades. But
and you can make a lot of money and not have the college debt, right?
Yep, exactly. Yep.
I mean, a lot of people are getting out of college and they're saying, well, why didn't I do this?
Yep.
Why did my K through 12 school system keep pushing me in the direction of college?
Yep. And
like that's what you were told, right?
Yeah. Not only that,
it's like, you gotta go to college. You gotta go to college.
Yeah, they're coming home from college and then going to do trade school
so
anyway.
They could pay off their student loans.
So then they could pay off the
or
student loans.
They're trying to get Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden to cancel
get rid of their debt.
There's no such thing as canceling student debt either.
You
have to get someone else to pay for it. Someone's going to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just cancel it.
That's a whole nother conversation, I feel. But I'm happy for your son. That sounds good. Socialism is for figs says, so I have to pay a lower income families that pay a lower tax rate to go to a family or go to a school in my area that I pay an enormous tax rate for. And these people do not have to pay out of pocket for the difference. What do you say about that?
Yeah, so I would argue that you're already paying for the students in the traditional public school system through the property tax system and through state state education budget. All I'm saying, I'm not saying that you should have to pay more, you should have to pay less. You should just have those same dollars that exist in the system today, and a lot of the times it's less because charters tend to get less and private school vouchers tend to be funded at lower amounts.
Well, let's keep it specifically about the public school. It feels like that's what they're talking about. So and we'll make it more specific. We're talking about a public school in a higher income family or area versus a lower income that like their neighboring family. And if someone here goes there, I think that let's just go with that.
So they're arguing they've bought their way into that public school and they want to keep that exclusivity through that because
that's what it sounds like.
When you buy a house, that's kind of factored into the house price, and they're saying, "Look, I paid for this." Essentially, that is a pretty legitimate argument that there could be that kind of sorting mechanism. But then comes to the question of does that mean just because there's a concentrated interest there to protect that, does that mean that housing values should be tied to school quality? It shouldn't. It shouldn't. Just like you shouldn't be residential. Your house value shouldn't reflect the price of the restaurant that you're residentially assigned to, right? People should still be able to go to that restaurant even though you live near it and you're more able to do so. So I would argue the same thing, that just because there is an interest in keeping the system the way that it is for someone who paid into that system, well, and also another response is they can still go to that school with their children. So. The system shouldn't be structured that way to begin with. But yeah, there is an argument to make that there is.
It's interesting because you've compared schooling to Trader Joe's versus Walmart and all that, and I do feel like the education system should be on a higher level on like the hierarchy system of society than grocery stores.
Well, it's another reason why I like private school choice and just giving the money to the people so that they could use it for private schools, and that doesn't create this kind of issue with now other people are going to be able to go to my traditional.
Well, that's always going to be a case though in these kind of situations though.
With open enrollment programs.
Well, you even said I'm not sure if we talked about it live or before the show started about there was examples of some people were lying on who their children were so to get them in better schools. For this example, we'll just use someone in a lower income area that pays a lower tax rate, lies to get their kid in a better school in the next neighboring district, and then say the parents find out and they're like, are they going to be upset or? Like, well, you kind of said it's not like they're paying more taxes because that person's there.
The property tax level is the same. It's not like they're having to subsidize an additional.
Right, exactly.
They're not paying for 2 students instead of 1.
Yeah.
It's just you're allowing for more competition into the system. And those families that did purchase the house by the higher quality government-run school or traditional public school, whatever you want to call it, they still get a priority in getting to send their children to those schools. So they're much more likely to be able to exercise that choice.
Right, because there's only a certain amount.
And if they're full, if they're full and you have open enrollment, then no one else is going to be able to come in anyway. That's why I think that open enrollment isn't really a meaningful form of school choice. Just give parents the money. Let them pay for a private school out of pocket, because then that will give the private sector an incentive to build more private schools.
That's it right there.
You have the market entry kind of mechanism where you won't have all these issues.
Yeah, that's the key right there, because this example from Socialism is for Figs is saying it's almost like there's only 2 schools. So if we were to implement school choice, this lower income family would be able to take their tax dollars and actually give it to a better school that will appear, because competition in the schooling world would then become more fierce. So then they would actually have access to a better school in their own area, right? So I feel like it's much bigger, and out of this feels like a very specific example, and I definitely understand it, but it's not
doesn't mean that the system should be like that.
Right. It's not as cut as dry, and that, because we're going to have these lower income families will have more options themselves, and they won't have to try to get into what would be considered a better school in a different district.
I always try to tie it back into the grocery store analogy. Just imagine if we had some weird system where we were residentially assigned to government-run grocery stores.
Okay.
And then I proposed, we should allow people to take their same funding to go to whatever grocery store they want.
That has
the
better
people
quality
that have
food.
bought a house by that other grocery store, they may say, now other people are able to use this grocery store that I live by, but that we shouldn't have that system to begin with. I see their argument, right? But
it is a little different because people can drive over there and
you could you're not residentially
shop.
assigned, right? But in the current system, you're not residentially.
I see.
But I'm saying, let's say if we had
that
this
was the
crazy
case.
system
Yeah.
where you're residentially assigned, that's... And
I don't know.
just because there are some benefits for people who have purchased their way into that system doesn't mean that system should be that way.
Right.
I mean,
All right.
that's like imagining we had that system for grocery stores. Then some people saying, now other people are going to be able to go to my grocery store.
I think you're going to like this next one.
All right.
David says voucher systems, and in all caps says do not work. That let's see. Anyone with a tiny bit of business knowledge knows it doesn't work. Drop in 10%. Students does not drop the budget by 10%. This
must be the same person. They keep using the same.
I think this is actually we went over this, but this was actually
goodness.
This was earlier. This was earlier on in when we were talking. So I think we actually went over this later on. And this, I actually recognize the name.
It's the same person, right?
This is literally the same person. So we actually, if they
don't work, then why are so many people flocking to use these programs?
Exactly. So we went over it. We went over that.
Let's stop giving them so much attention.
Yeah. Hydro says, how does your guest feel about affirmative action and black women going to schools that they aren't qualified for? Yeah. So do you know about this?
Affirmative action at the higher education level, yes.
So like Oxford, for example, they earlier on in the year, they were like, well, we're going to say if any black students are having a hard time, you don't have to do as much work as anybody else.
I hadn't even heard of that one yet.
Yeah, so this was like 2 or 3 months ago, in kind of like the heat of...
I mean, it seems like they're kind of discriminating based on race.
It seems like it?
Well,
no, hold on.
I don't like to take a strong stance on these things.
I do. I have a very strong stance on this. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely racism. Mm-hmm. They're basically showing the business world, like you even said earlier, that, Harvard, right? What would you say about Harvard? It's like, whatever. People aren't, they want experience. They don't want the paper anymore that says Harvard on it. So now you take that. You see Oxford, and now we know that Oxford's giving. It's not. You don't have to even do as much work.
Yeah. That could devalue their diplomas. Yeah.
Not only devalue the diploma. It's bigger than that. It's devaluing them as a person based on their race.
Yep.
And that right there is the problem. They're making it worse for these people that. I mean, I want everyone to be even. I want everyone to get to, like, being a Oxford graduate everyone should have to have the same standard to graduate.
I mean,
period.
This reminds me of a magnet school kind of rule that they had in, I want to say it was Connecticut recently, that brought in some court issues. They had a requirement that at least 25% of the students had to be white or Asian. Why? So the problem that they ran into was that they were located in areas with higher proportions of minority students.
Okay.
And so they were running up to that 75% threshold, and then they were not allowing people of color to enter the school based on their race. So they're kind of
That's already happening.
Their intended result was to have some mixing between different races.
Yeah, which is nothing wrong with that.
But then it backfired on them because this was disproportionately serving students of color who were trying to get into the school, and then they had a situation where they had seats available, but then they were the rule told them to turn down students based on the color of their skin.
Even if they had seats available.
Even if they had seats available, because
that's
look,
ridiculous.
You already have 75% of your student body at non-white, non-Asian.
Yep.
Well, if you let another person in, then that'll change it to 76. That's against the law. That was the law that they had. It was struck down recently. I think Pacific Legal Foundation took that up, and it was a really interesting case to look out. But
in California right now, they're trying to rescind specific words in affirmative action and make it so that statewide they can discriminate based on race. So those problems right there, that would bring it back into law, that they can then of course start discriminating so that they can pick and choose.
I mean, that's the problem, right? These unintended consequences.
Consequences.
I never like to question people's motives, but I feel like they don't think about all these other things that can happen.
Exactly.
That.
Yep.
Well-meaning people could actually harm the people that they're actually trying to help. I think that's the problem.
Exactly. All right, where were we? My goodness. Let's see. These are great questions, guys. Thank you very much for hitting us up with these. This is awesome. Great conversations. Samaj says, Adam, such a great topic. Thank you for you and your guest for talking about this. Huge blessings to you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, honestly, I am a big advocate for education, and I think there's a huge education issue with society. I feel a lot of our problems spawn from education. It is the foundation of being a human being. What we learn makes us who we are. So this is huge. School choice is a very big part of giving freedom back to what you choose your kids to be educated by. It's super important.
And just to add to that really quickly, I think a lot of our political polarization that we're seeing today has a lot to do with the failures of the education system. Because if you are properly trained in logic and having logical arguments, when you disagree with someone, you won't say, Adam disagrees with me, so he's an evil guy. So I'm not going to even talk to him, and I'm gonna fight him or whatever I'm going to do. Right?
I get that often now because I'm voting for Trump. So,
but look, so that's the gut reaction, right? But and so it seems like the norm is an ad hominem attack and a logical fallacy instead of let's think through the logic of his arguments and instead of
they don't even
his
do
background
that though.
Or his character, because it's easier, right, to just say, oh, you're an evil person.
And I'm just going to stay mad. I'm going to stay mad. It's easier for me to stay mad and not talk to you anymore, just cut you out of my life.
Yeah, and I think that people's experiences through the school system could amplify the problem if they're not being taught proper logical kind of thinking skills. And competition in education could lead to better logical thinking skills and lower likelihoods of doing that. I fully
believe that's what the competition is what education systems need. That's what they need. We need to have, capitalism is competition. That's our whole country is based off, capitalism is the good side of it is that we try to better one up each other. So why are we complacent in the education system that has been in place for so long? School choice is just making it so that there's competition, and that's what we need.
Yeah, the school system is largely a socialist institution, right? Especially if you don't have choice. It's government run, so you can't really argue that it's not a socialist institution. Too. So.
All right, let's see here. Oh, I just got a little bit of a jump. Let me find where we were. All right, sorry about that. Well, thank you for all your super chats, everybody. I really appreciate you all. All right, I think I found you. Let's see. Hydro says, "How immoral are you? You work with for the New York Post. How can we trust anything you say?"
New York Post? What are you talking about?
Whoa.
Is he joking?
No. Well, no, it's because the New York Post posted your article. I
wrote for the New York Post.
So listen, I could tell you a little something that I've noticed about Corey. He is very enthusiastic about getting his message out there. Okay, so he wrote a strong article about how union power is the reason why schools are not reopening, and I think that's an incredibly strong message that we need to realize, because as I said multiple times on the show so far, the children are the future. We need to cater and make sure that everything that they get is what's important in this life. And if it's about union power, that's about union power, not kids' education.
And look, I wrote a full-length study before this New York Post article came out too on the topic. So it's in Social Science Research Network. Are you going to say that's an evil institution?
No. That's fine. That's fine. so you get it. Hydro again actually says, but why New York Post hasn't talked about Scott Wiener, who wants gay to not register as sex offenders? Well, I mean, it's. See, I'm not trying. I didn't bring up the New York Post article.
If you had to agree with every single thing an outlet says or posts to be able to publish something, you'd never publish anything.
That's a good point.
That's a good point. I would publish in the New York Times, Washington Post if they'd have me.
Yeah,
but I don't agree with a lot of the things they say. But it's okay.
It's fine. It's fine. Listen, he's not letting New York Post define who he is. All right, he wrote an article to get his message out there, and that's
they have a big audience. So I'll take it.
So Sejong the Great, hello, good sir. How are you today? Made a good stick on the market this week, Adam. Drink some hot whiskey and enjoy your Labor Day weekend. The union teachers are also scared to death of parents monitoring their actual classes. We talked about that. 2 reasons. It's either it is indoctrination and it's bad. He said it's one or the other, but I think it's both. I kind of altered it.
I have to interject really quickly. Rutherford County in Tennessee, they sent a letter to their teachers or to the parents telling them that they need to sign a form to agree not to watch the virtual classes.
If someone sent that to me, I would, for one, I'd be like, absolutely not. Now I'm absolutely going to watch what you're teaching my kids.
Well, now they're saying we're going to kick you out of the Zoom meeting if you do watch and we catch you.
Bye.
So this is why we're seeing an exodus from the public school system, which I didn't hit on either.
Yeah.
We're seeing homeschool filings increase a lot, like everywhere that we're seeing. Like in Vermont, we saw a 75% increase. Nebraska, a 21% increase in filings from last year.
Wow.
And we're seeing traditional public school enrollments dropping everywhere that we're looking as well.
Wow.
People are getting fed up with the system.
All systems, honestly. All right, Paul says, thank you for working. Forgive me if I missed this. How do we ensure the account for education that is used for homeschool students is actually used for education and not pocketed by garbage parents?
Well, I would argue that on net, the parents are less likely to waste the money than the government schools. So it's not like we have that accountability in the public schools already.
Boom.
But no. I do have a more serious response, which is education savings accounts don't just go in the form of cash to families. Then you can go and buy booze, for example.
Right.
It goes into an education savings account, which means you have to spend the money on education-related services. So it's not perfect form of making sure the funds are spent exactly well, but if families are caught spending it on non-education expenses, then they can get in trouble legally for that.
All right. Well, there you go. Giorgio says, too cool for public school. Nice. Sejong the Great again says, where I lived, the public schools actually shut down schools and scattered the kids. School choice is not a regional problem or a local issue. Oh, David, again here with the tweet that we were talking about says, with private school vouchers, how do you prevent people from using it for religious institutions, doing an end run for the separation of church and state? We went over it. We talked about it. So why
are you so anti-religious? I'm not religious, but people should be able to pick.
You, David. So we talked about your exact tweet that you put on my tweet when I announced that he was going to be on my show. So we talked about it. Giorgio says, we all descend from Adam. That's okay. That's nice. Dizzy Kincaid says, just got here watching from a Turdcast video. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming by. Maroc says, 333 motivating you to keep your eyes on the goal. Thank you, Maroc. Appreciate it. It's a buddy of mine. Hydro again says, both of you need to go learn from Jesse Lee Peterson why it's important to forgive your moms. Stop being a beta. What? Oh, I like Jesse Lee Peterson. He's hilarious. Koala says, smash the like button. Smash. I've learned more on this channel than my government class at high school. Wow, that's a high honors. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I try to do what I can to give you my thoughts on things. Death says, I'm late to the party. Did anyone ask you if you saw Carlin video getting mobbed? Love the show. Keep it up. I did, and she's okay. She's safe. I reached out to her. Hey, we've got another Adam here. Adam says, I hope these ideas take hold in our country. There has been talk of giving the money to the parents to use as they see fit to get their children an education. The last 25 years have been hell bringing 3 children through school. Yeah, I believe it. My goodness. But I think it's taking root.
There's at least 4 bills in Congress right now. You heard at the Republican National Convention, at least 10 speakers mentioned school choice. So it's really getting into the mainstream.
You were live tweeting.
We're talking
you were
about
like,
it tonight.
Dude, they said it again.
Yeah, I was doing screen records and showing it.
Yeah, you were stoked.
So it's a big policy. And look, people are fighting for it at the state level as well. Look at Florida if you want to look at a place to do school choice well. They're expanding it pretty rapidly.
No, that's awesome. And really, that's a good point. At a state level, at a local level, that's how everything changes. Everyone needs to stop blaming the presidency for everything when it's, in reality, it's everybody in government's problem. You have to realize that everyone you vote for makes a difference. So make sure you vote appropriately.
And 92% of education funding in the United States is based on state and local revenues, not federal revenues.
You heard it here.
So you can get a federal school choice program, but it's not, it usually isn't going to be a ton of money, but it could incentivize states to enact programs too. Okay.
Hydro says, oh, that's not very nice. I'm not going to even read your super chat because I don't like what you just said there. Kaiser TV says, Department of Education's own numbers say 1 in 10 kids is sexually molested in public schools. I should have the right to choose not to fund that. Yep. You told me that before we talked about it, and I'm glad you super chatted. That's true. That is a true fact, and it's ridiculous. We are really running over time, so I'm just going to kind of read through this now. RG Merkel says, don't listen to the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters. The union heads support Biden. Most of us firefighters support Trump 2020. All right, there you go. Angela says, if you can choose whatever college you want to go to with public schools altogether and go to... Oh, hold on, sorry.
Do the same thing with K-12.
Yeah, that's it. Give the students the money to choose K through 12 school. I agree 100%. Curtis said there shouldn't be a cutoff time on Saturday nights.
Let's go.
This one could have gone on for 2 more hours easy. You're absolutely right, and you're staying in Philly too, so you gotta head back over there. So
I'm gonna ask you
it's already 10:30.
Suggestions about what to do.
We've been going 2.5 hours.
Holy moly!
But I'm gonna finish through. We'll still try to answer some questions because you guys super chatted, so we're gonna give you that. Thor says, Corey, please try to use more terse and concise language and conceptualizing. It will strengthen your arguments and widen your reach into the audience.
Boom. Take it.
Cool. Mr. Scott Drummond, thanks for the super chat. Satoshi says, thanks for this one. My mom works public schools, and I asked her about school vouchers, and she has no idea about it. So I will send her this. Awesome. Thank you very much. I really do hope this enlightens people about what school choice is. We went over a lot of statistics, so it could be a little... and honestly, that goes back to Thor's... it is a lot to take in. There's a lot of information about it. So
I would just say that the best way to explain it to your relatives and stuff is to fund the students instead of the system.
Boom.
I mean, that just makes so much sense to
yeah,
people.
that sums it up fairly well. Arthur says, I've been an inner city charter school teacher for 17 years. Our kids constantly outperform their peers in the public schools. Thank you for your service, Arthur. I feel a lot of teachers aren't given their proper due for what they do for our society. So thank you, Arthur. Sejan the Great again says, pronunciation is Ave Maria. Oh, yeah. Someone said that at the end of their super chat earlier, so thank you. Now, when I say it, I'll say it correctly. Hatchet says, I'll drop this here. Adam, keep it up. This is your magnus opus. Oh, magnum opus. Keep it up. Oh, wow, my goodness. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thor again says, reform child labor laws. Let children work or learn as they will. It is in their hands alone what their futures will be ultimately forged.
Well,
I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't know if I actually 100% agree with that. I mean, I did some work on what Labor Day is, and before Labor Day was instituted, there was 7-day work weeks, 12-hour days. Kids 5 to 6 were working in mines. Like, it was pretty crazy before it was implemented in the early, I think it was like 1860s or something. I don't have the date offhand, but
I mean, well, think about it. Schooling is kind of a form of labor.
That's a good
students,
point.
But they don't get paid anything.
That honestly,
they don't get paid.
You're right.
It's compelled labor. It's compelled through compulsory education laws. But it's you also have to pay for it, and they're
not
paid
producing
for doing
anything.
So.
So they're
the argument is that they're producing for society, right? They're producing a educated populace.
Okay.
And the argument for public schools is that it's a social benefit. It's good for others.
Right.
So they're kind of producing in that way, you would argue.
That's a good point.
And so, I mean, they're not getting paid for it, though.
All right, Chet Chisholm says, look up reverse classrooms. My cousin is a teacher and principal here, and she pushed for them. Kids learn at home and discuss and work on stuff in class. Interesting. Have you heard of reverse classrooms?
No, is this kind of like the Montessori?
Well, this is up in Canada, so I haven't heard of it, but it is interesting. So you learn at home, and then you go to school and discuss everything with your peers, essentially.
Yeah, I think
that's
of this as
cool.
hybrid homeschooling.
It's kind of like critical thinking with students of your own age. But you even said it, that you learned at home in your environment that was more easy to learn in, and then you go, and instead of sitting there getting information hammered into you, you get to discuss it, critical thinking. Right?
Yeah, I would define this as hybrid homeschooling. It's another term that a lot of people use for this, and it's kind of more like the college model, right? Where you go and discuss things at the round table setting. And
then you go home and learn, read this book, because we're going to go in and
sounds like a step in the right direction to me.
I agree. I like it a lot. Thank you, Chet. Linux says, my mom didn't get her GED until 40. She homeschooled me K through 12. I'm a college graduate, and when my health improves, I'm going to become a doctor. Thank you very much. I'm proud of you. Thanks for getting out there and doing it. My grandma actually went to college I think she was 50 something. She just decided she wants to learn. She went and got an education doing something she wanted to do.
Boom.
Chet Chisholm says, my ADHD led me to my career in paramedicine. Wow. Yeah. Well, thanks, Chet. Appreciate all your super chats. Sejan the Great again says, ADHD here, and I took AP to engage me. I actually had horrible grades until I forced the challenge. I graduated with honors with a GPA so low it was awful. I got my special little banner in the book and everything. I special. They spelled it a little differently, so I had to add that on there. Sejong, thanks for the super chat. Political Piehead says, there would be an uber innovation in education styles if we had a nationwide school choice. Absolutely.
Is he saying like Uber, like the technology?
Yeah, like really good, like a really amazing.
I thought like the app.
No, the actual word Uber.
But I think that's the future of education too. If you guys want to look up unschool.school, there's like a platform that links educators to students in an app form, just like how Uber links providers of the ride services with people who need to get places, and so that you can kind of rethink education that way.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
let's talk about that right now. I know we're running late, but you know what? It doesn't matter. I think that's really interesting because the future of human life is on the internet.
People like choices.
Like we're on the internet right now. Like we just talked about all this stuff to the internet. They're shifting to Zoom classes. If you're saying that someone can Uber, I use the term Uber, but say I get an app, I just go, I want to learn math class. Oh, there's a math class that this one private teacher in I don't know, some Utah, doesn't matter, it's just some other state. But why wouldn't we, bring it into having like this whole online competition too? You add the competition side of it too. Who's the best teacher? You want to have the best driver as your Uber driver. So then you can have teachers that are really good, and then they have specific classes. And I mean, that's just opening up a whole nother can of worms. My goodness.
I mean, Uber and Airbnb tapped into an otherwise untapped supply of rideshare services, and then also hotel services that you would have never been able to access before.
Good point.
And then education, kind of Uber or whatever you want to call it, Uber education would tap into this otherwise untapped supply of high quality educators who didn't want to, for whatever reason, go into the teacher certification system in the public school system.
Did we just access like this is pretty incredible. What was that? You said there's an app for that already?
Unschool.school is one of them.
Unschool.school. That's cool. Very interesting.
If you type that into your URL, it'll pop up.
Yeah, very, very cool. All right, let's keep moving. Roger says, I'm a public high school teacher, and I'm such a ridiculous fool that since they hired me to teach English, I teach my kids, wait for it, English. Life will teach them politics. I teach subjects.
Boom.
Roger, I applaud you. Thank you very much. Shun says, hey, Adam, Loving your show and looking forward to what the future has for you. Pat Salty Trumpy Bear for me. I will do that. This is for... I'm sorry, what was it? Shun. This is for Shun. There you go. Look at his blue eyes. He's cute. I still don't know who sent that to me. It was just came down here. I had set up my studio, and he was just sitting on my chair, and I was like, I picked him up. I was like, "You're my friend now."
Whoever sent you these need to get 2 pats on the back.
I know.
Too. These are super cool.
Thanks for sending me these wonderful lights. They're these spinning light bulbs.
It gets the juices flowing.
People, well, I used to spin a certain UFO in another show that shall remain nameless. Sean says, just wanted to say unions need to be regulated. Sometimes they have too much power and F over everyone else with mediocrity as they keep overcharging for their jobs. Puerto Rico is just a living example of union corruption. It sucks. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we talked about
what better way to regulate them from the bottom up through letting people vote with their feet elsewhere to places that aren't unionized.
Go ahead, keep your unions.
Keep them.
But
we're going to take their money.
We're just going to let the parents choose, and then suddenly they're like, oh man, we got to actually, like what they were just saying, they don't care. They overcharge for their jobs. They F over everyone else. If they had to actually
think about it,
be competitive, I think that would force them to reform themselves. So I think we're onto something. And thank you for your work, because it's really important. Technically Right says, hey Adam, please watch The History of Labor Day by Romanian TV. It's a great vid about the links between the labor movement and communism. Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Maybe I'll do an episode about it. Political Pothead says, imagine a high school centered around the trades. There's got to be. Is there not?
Career and technical education schools.
Tech high schools?
CTE,
it makes sense. Yep. I mean, the trades are super important. I always like to think about the future, and I think the future of humanity is going to be spacefaring. I think we're going to move into space eventually. It's going to be, I mean, we're almost there. You see what Elon's doing. He's getting a starship that can launch into space and come back down and launch back into space and can be continuing and using, we're going to go to space. So you think HVAC is really important because we need to understand how to regulate the temperature, because space can fluctuate from negative 200, 300 degrees to plus 300 degrees in a matter of seconds. So the inside of a spaceship, that's just HVAC. Then you think electrical, everything's going to be electrical. So trades are super important and always will be important. So it's always a good thing to learn. I'm in the trades myself, or I did a lot, so I've got
a real marketable skill, right?
I got love for tradesmen. Chioma, I hope I said your name right. Chioma Velma Anello, I love your name. It's great. Hello, Adam. I love your podcast. Oh well, thank you very much. I read the K tweet differently. What if the classroom is the only place that a kid is safe to express themselves? Growing up with at home was mentally, physically, and emotionally unsafe. That is a good point.
There are some,
Not all homes can be a place of conducive learning. So the classroom can offer that safe space, if you will. So and you make a really good point.
My response is we can't make perfect the enemy of the good. Right there,
okay.
And this is only looking at one side of the equation here. That there are some cases where there are instances of abuse happening in the home, and the government should absolutely step in. But that doesn't mean we need to force everybody to send their kids to government-run schools.
Right.
Especially when we start looking at things like the report that we cited with the 1 in 10 children experience educator sexual misconduct in the government school system by the time they reach 12th grade.
Well, then what is the comparison though to kids that are dealing with that at home also? So my argument, it's happening all over the place.
Yeah, my argument is we're never going to get it completely eliminated. We should strive for that, and government should absolutely step in when instances of abuse happen. But I would argue that abuse is more likely to happen in the public school system than in the homes on average. So families should be able to have those decisions until they show that that there is evidence of wrongdoing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, the goal is to move towards a better system, and nothing's ever going to be a perfect place or a system, because there's always going to be, bullies or some sort of negative humans. Not all humans are good, simply put.
And this is some of the arguments that were made by a Harvard professor, Elizabeth Bartholet, right when the pandemic started and the schools started getting closed down. She called to ban homeschooling, and she argued, it's because there could be some instances of abuse, and if they can go into the public schools, well, then maybe there's mandatory reporters, she argued, and then that they can report the parents to CBS.
Yeah.
But then if that logic is true, then is she also arguing, and other people who buy this argument, arguing that we need to send children to institutions between the ages 0 and 5 because there's potential for abuse happening between 0 and 5.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we need to compel people to send their children to government institutions in those years? And what about once you hit 18, once you exit the school system, you can be involved in relationships where there is abuse? Does that mean that we should mandate that every single couple goes to mandatory government counseling?
Right.
I see
think
where the argument's coming from.
Yeah,
and the government should absolutely step in if there's a problem.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't make everybody guilty until proven innocent, right? We should, if there is evidence of wrongdoing, then that's when the government should step in.
I think this is just proof to me that we need more choices. Really, that's it. We need more choices because we're not taking away the public classroom.
Yeah, you can still do that.
That will always be available. This is doing is giving more people more choices and introducing a competition system into the education place that will only just increase education for everyone. It'll make even the public schools go, we really need to step up our game if we're going to want to keep the people that are coming here.
And we're not saying private schools or homeschools are perfect. We're just saying that on average, people will make better decisions for their children than bureaucrats.
Precisely. Paper City Gamer Jeff says, hello from Massachusetts. Great guest. Feels like you're giving me homework on a Saturday, but I'm learning a lot. Well, thank you. I'm glad you came and hung out with us tonight. Don Reed said, this is the best ever. Have him back for more. Yeah, I feel like it felt like I could have just like walked away and let you just wrap it out.
We still haven't gotten into a lot of the crap where the daycares are charging families for public schools. The public schools aren't reopening in like 5 or 10 states.
It's crazy.
And then they're reopening the public schools and then saying, well, we'll only reopen and serve your students if you pay extra. It's extortion, essentially.
It is. It does feel like it. My goodness.
We didn't get into how Oregon outlawed private education in 1922 either. It's another conversation.
Yeah. Well,
and how homeschooling is illegal in Germany.
Is it really?
Yeah,
it's
been on the books since 1938.
Well, who did that? Who made it illegal?
Yeah, it's one.
I think we all know. 1938, Germany making.
Do your own homework.
Making homeschooling illegal. What else did he do? He defunded the police. Also, I don't know if you knew that. Same time era. Yeah, we all know where that led. Let's see where we were here. Rarity says, hi, Adam. Love watching the pod. I got to ask, what kind of Magic the Gathering deck do you run? Also, what format? Sorry about getting off topic. Do you know Magic the Gathering at all?
No, but I remember when I was here last time, I saw a bunch of the cards and stuff that you got upstairs.
I'm not gonna. Not get too deep into it. I don't really play often anymore because I've been so infatuated with learning the political side of things, educational side of things, trade. I feel like I've just been nonstop taking in information for months now, and I just haven't had the time to.
How did you do that without a formal school?
All by myself.
Yep.
The internet. I use the internet. The internet is part of the future of what we've got going on. Apple says, hey, Adam, reporting from Melbourne. Our I forget. It's not Premiere. I keep. Premier, how do you say it in Australian? I forget. I'm just going to keep saying it in my rugged American accent. Our premier just announced a 2-week extension to the curfew. Goodness sakes. Oof. Except he decided to be generous and extend the curfew to 9 p.m. Yay. I'm sorry for you guys down there. That sucks. Ryan says, I went to a high school in a lower income area, then moved to an area with a higher income and a better school. It was like a culture shock. It would be nice if all schools catered to the students equally. School choice, baby. That's literally what it's about. Fake Name says, regarding child labor laws, they do need reform. Laws made to prevent toddlers working in mines now prevent young adults from gaining part-time experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I could see where like a teenager could start working, like I don't see why, once you get to high school, like a part-time job, or even working at trades, becoming an apprentice on the weekends or something, I could definitely see where that could need some reform.
Well, and again, we shouldn't pretend like the school system isn't working itself.
I know.
You're not getting
I know.
very many meaningful skills, and then you're compelled to do it, which is another aspect, and then you're not paid to do it.
Well, I feel like I would love to have you on again, and we can actually talk about the education system itself, because we focused a really hardcore spotlight on school choice and what that means. And this kind of goes into, well, I guess what you were just saying about, look, we're not pretending that school itself as the institution that it is perfect. I feel like well, at least me, I think that we're teaching the wrong kind of things. We are not teaching about what empathy is, mental stability, understanding how you affect others and how they affect you, like these natural things that we deal with in relationships, and not just, like a partner, like a sexual partner. I'm talking about every single relationship that you have in your life. There's an effect that you have on them and they affect you. And and that's just me tipping the iceberg of something that I feel needs to be taught in school. So again, another time, I'd love to have you back. Let me just, we only have 2 more super chats. Let me just rock these out. Kiernoth says, what do you folks think about self-paced educational courses like the Khan Academy? I learned a lot from stuff through them. Do you know about the Khan Academy?
Yep.
What is that?
Yeah, it's free online learning that you can access at your fingertips.
That's amazing.
It's, that's
incredible.
Just look up Khan Academy online, and you can, a lot of people who are in the college system use Khan Academy as a supplement because they didn't learn the math right with their professor, and they're trying to figure it out. So they're paying for college.
I'm not even surprised.
And they have this free, and that gets you another kind of, it's another thing that shows you that it's more about the signal than because if it was really just about learning the math, you can go on to Khan Academy and learn it through there. I highly recommend Khan Academy.
Right on. E-Dude says, I was homeschooled my whole life, and the way my parents did it was they set up the whole week worth of work and told me if I completed it in 2 days, I could take the next 4 off. Legit. As long as you were taking the information in and not just like ripping through the information, I could see, the incentive of that. So that concludes our, wait, I got one more. He said, make it 3. The Gray Gamer says, make it 3 more super chats. Hey. So I read your super chat. Thanks, Gray Gamer. So, wow, that was a lot to take in. But I think it's super important. I think this is a change that could help, because the education system is super crucial. And really, as important as it is, what we've noticed this year is it's an indoctrination to changing the minds and brainwashing our kids. And that right there, that alone, we need a reform of the schooling system, because it's really messed up. So we need to be on top of what our kids are learning. We need to know and make sure that they're learning the proper things. And if we have the choice, then we are choosing what they're learning. And that's really what it is. So Corey, thank you very much. Why don't you tell everybody how they can follow you, and send out your, I put up your name, you can point up to it. You can follow him. It's DeAngelis Corey on Twitter. Where else can they find you?
I post all of my stuff on Twitter at DeAngelis Corey, but also if you want more of the formal articles, I'm available at the Reason Foundation, REASON. If you want to Google Reason Foundation Corey, I'm the only one there. And also a lot of my articles are at the Cato Institute Corey. I'm the only one there as well. So if you want to check out my longer form articles, that's where you'll find them.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I really had a great talk with you. I'd love to have you on again and really dig more into education.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam.
Well, thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you, understood what we were talking about. I think this is really an important subject that affects everyone across the board. Doesn't matter. We all bleed the same color. All kids are the same. We need to give education to everyone, no matter who you are, where you live. And I think this is a really good step for that. So thanks for joining in, and I will see you next week on Adamcast IRL. Have a great night.